Prologue. Alien diplomacy at home. Earth's diplomats have been working with the Xylosians for years, trying to negotiate a treaty that would allow the two species to normalize trade and begin scientific and cultural exchanges. The governing royal family from Xylos had finally agreed to come to Earth for finalization and ratification of the treaty. One thing remained before the treaty could be completed. Xylosian culture required that the official Xylos delegation spend 3-day cycles living with a non-governmental family to fully assess the character and compatibility. A location on one of the habitable land masses, the planet is picked at random by the Xylosian delegation, and the closest domicile to the chosen location becomes the delegation guest house. The family would be given 12 hours to prepare, and Earth's government was only to provide notification but was not to interfere otherwise. Earth delegation agreed, and a notice was sent to the entire population explaining that one family will have the honor to represent all of humanity. And by honor, Earth's government made it clear that acceptance was not optional. The Xylosian ships exited from slipspace halfway between Mars and Earth. They sent word to Earth that they would be arriving in orbit in 12 hours. They also included a set of coordinates, the location of the guest house. Earth's diplomats quickly located the target, Fairfield, Ohio, middle-class suburban house owned by the Peterson family. Sarah, a middle school science teacher, and Tom, an electrician, live in a 3-bedroom house with their son Kyle, age 2, daughter Kindra, age 4, Pitbull Petie, and their cat Mittens, who hates everyone. Chapter 1. Sarah Peterson, middle school science teacher, wife, mother of 2, survivor of the Thursday morning playground incident, and, if this day didn't break her, champion of the suburban universe, was down to her last half hour before the visit that could determine the fate of humanity. She knew this not because of an inner clock or a supernatural maternal sense, but because her phone had set off a siren every 10 minutes for the past 3 hours, each time with a more urgent reminder. Her hands vibrated with adrenaline as she cleared away the battlefield of breakfast. Cold, congealed oatmeal, cereal dust clinging to the sides of a bright blue bowl, and a ruined Lego starfighter sticky with grape jelly. She muttered as she worked. Clear the table, mop the floor, vacuum the couch. Petey, no, not the throw pillows. The last was a shout, directed at the pit bull currently shaking a chewed-up foam cylinder with the glee of a gladiator. Petey froze, blue pillow scraps dangling from his mouth. He gave Sarah a look, a canine apology, or perhaps a challenge. It was always hard to tell with him, and trotted to the corner, leaving a trail of slobber and foam. Sarah groaned, grabbed the dustpan, and knelt to sweep the aftermath into a small trash bag, already bulging with similar casualties. Above her, a thud, followed by the thump, thump, thump of small feet. She risked a glance at the stairs, praying her children wouldn't sense the cosmic significance of the day and escalate their usual mischief into legend. She darted to the living room, arms sweeping in a frantic arc as she gathered remote controls, mismatched socks, and a mummified banana that had achieved sentience under the coffee table. The banana went into a grocery bag labeled donations, which was probably a sin, but she would deal with it later. Her smartwatch buzzed again, 26 minutes left. She would have screamed if there weren't 2 more layers of mess to power through. She reached the bookshelf, the crown jewel of the Peterson living room, and found Mittens, the cat, glaring down from his perch atop a stack of ancient encyclopedias. His tail twitched, daring her to try and reclaim any of the hardcover territory he had conquered. Sarah didn't have time for the usual détente. She lunged for a fallen photo album, missed, and instead upended an entire shelf. Mittens launched himself off the toppled books, leaving a claw mark on her shoulder and a cloud of dust motes spinning in his wake. If you're listening, cosmic overlords, this is exactly why I'm not a cat person. She straightened, replaced the photo album, and, with the efficiency of a mother in crisis mode, stuffed all books larger than a textbook behind the sofa. From the kitchen, the microwave beeped. She'd set it as a timer, but the memory of what it was counting down for eluded her. As she hustled over, she nearly tripped on a plastic triceratops, stubbed her toe on a laundry basket, and barely avoided stepping in a wet patch that could only have come from Petey's exuberance. This was not the home of a woman expecting the next evolutionary leap in intergalactic diplomacy. The microwave revealed nothing but a single, sweating coffee cup, long since abandoned in the mayhem. She downed it in one bitter gulp and checked the fridge. Inside, string cheese, ketchup, 2 cans of LaCroix, and an optimistic Tupperware labeled salad. There were no snacks. There were, in fact, anti-snacks, objects that threatened to consume her instead. She closed the fridge with a bang, bracing herself on the kitchen counter. On it, a yellow sticky note with her husband's handwriting. Groceries, back by 9. Don't panic. She crumpled it in her fist. He was always so calm, so infuriatingly calm. She was alone in the trenches, and if he missed the opening volley, she would have his head. She checked the front window, half expecting an alien vanguard or a horde of news vans. The street was empty, save for Mrs. Kim walking her poodle and the distant roar of the garbage truck. Sarah allowed herself a brief fantasy of throwing herself in front of the recycling bin, halting all progress until the universe gave her a do-over. The door banged open. Her husband Tom walked in, arms loaded with 3 bursting grocery bags and a 6-pack wedged under one elbow. He gave her a sheepish grin, eyes flicking from her wild hair to the mountain of foam fur and scattered books. "Hey, you look like you could use a beer," he said, voice entirely too cheerful for a man with no skin in the game. He dropped the bags on the counter, producing a plastic tub of hummus, an entire rotisserie chicken, and a box of organic crackers. "Got everything on the list, plus chocolate, because, he gestured to the ceiling with his chin. "Royalty." Sarah could only stare. "Alien royalty, Tom. Royalty. In our house. With the kids' fingerprints on every surface and Petey's fur in every conceivable crevice. And the living room. Do you see this?" She swept her arm toward the bookshelf, which now looked as if it had survived a minor earthquake. Tom walked over, inspected the pile, and nodded. At least the dust hid the cat hair. "Not funny," she hissed. He held up his hands. "I'm just saying, if they're coming to judge, we're giving them a true Earth experience." He peeled a banana, took a bite, and immediately spit it into the trash. "How long do we have?" Sarah checked her watch. 22 minutes, 22. "We're not ready. I'm not ready." Tom looked around, considering. "We never are." She wanted to throw something at him. Instead, she grabbed a rag and began frantically wiping down the fridge door, scrubbing at the sticky patches left by the kids' parade of magnets and jammy hands. Tom hovered in the kitchen, unloading the bags and eating crackers at an alarming rate. Sarah's brain looped through her checklist. Snacks? If snacks counted as a rotisserie chicken, then yes, they had snacks. Couch? Destroyed, but now refoamed. Floor? She would pretend the stains were an Earth custom. She risked another glance at the stairs, still quiet. She caught Tom's reflection in the oven door, eyebrow raised, mouth quirked in a lopsided grin. "What?" He shrugged, biting another cracker. "Just thinking. The first interstellar dignitaries to land on our planet, and they're coming to the Petersons' 3-bedroom colonial. Not the White House, not the UN, but here, in the middle of suburban New Jersey. It's beautiful, in a way." Sarah blinked. "It's a nightmare." "Same thing, depending on your perspective." She finished scrubbing, tossed the rag in the sink, and collapsed onto a kitchen chair. "Tell me you at least got the good coffee." Tom slid a pound of fair trade beans across the table. "Ground and ready. We're going to caffeinate them into world peace." She smiled in spite of herself, then remembered the scale of their task. "We have to clean the bathroom, and the spare room, and the backyard. What if they go outside?" Tom wandered over, ruffling her hair. "One crisis at a time. I'll take the bathroom. You tackle the spare room." He glanced at the front door. "If it makes you feel better, I'll even put on real pants." Sarah snorted. "I'd prefer a hazmat suit." He disappeared down the hall, whistling, and she let herself breathe for 2 seconds before shooting up and heading for the spare room. The hallway was worse than she remembered, backpacks exploding with homework, art projects taped to every surface, and at least 4 pairs of sneakers abandoned mid-stride. She opened the door to the guest room and surveyed the damage. Air mattress, deflated, sheets crumpled on the floor, closet overflowing with out-of-season coats, sports equipment, and her own half-finished science fair projects. She set to work, folding, stuffing, cramming, and, when all else failed, hiding. Somewhere in the house, a crash. Petey's bark echoed through the ductwork. Sarah ignored it. She had 17 minutes. The bed made, she stuffed the closet with such ferocity that a soccer ball shot out and ricocheted off the wall. She kicked it back in, slammed the door, and tossed a decorative throw over the mattress. The effect was not great, but nothing in her adult life had prepared her for alien protocol, so she'd take it. She ran to the window and scanned the street again. Still clear. Back to the living room. Tom was on his knees, scrubbing the bathroom floor with a level of attention she'd never seen him use on any previous domestic task. Sarah set to work on the couch, using the lint roller with a surgeon's precision. Petey watched her, drooling as if he expected her to invite him onto the freshly cleaned cushions. She glared and he shuffled away, dejected. With 10 minutes to spare, she surveyed the battlefield. The house looked fine, not pristine, but better than most Tuesdays. She checked her reflection in the hall mirror, fluffed her hair, and wiped the coffee stain off her shirt with the hem. Her nerves trembled, but she willed herself to stand straight. Tom appeared, smelling faintly of bleach and wearing the world's most obvious poker face. He had changed into a crisp shirt, tucked, and actual slacks. It was a minor miracle. "They said they'd ring the bell, right?" he asked. Sarah nodded, hands fluttering to her sides. "If they even have fingers." They stood together in the entryway, silent for the first time all morning. Sarah imagined the news cycle, the memes, the inevitable barrage of jokes if this went wrong. She imagined her children growing up in a world where "Mom tanked the first alien visit" became playground lore. She took a breath, found Tom's hand, and squeezed. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but let's do it anyway." Outside, the sky darkened, just for a moment. Sarah's phone buzzed, this time not with a reminder, but with a calendar notification. "Prepare for royal visit." She almost laughed. She checked the couch again, wiped a smear off the door handle, and nodded to Tom. "Let's do this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He smiled. "At least we know they're not coming for our interior decorating skills." Sarah grinned, tension melting just a little, and for the first time all morning she felt almost ready. Chapter 2. The hologram activated at exactly 8:03 a.m., as if it had been lurking in their living room waiting for the precise, most inconvenient moment to strike. 1 second, Tom was balancing the fancy coffee beans in one hand and scratching Petey's ears with the other, both of them basking in the fragile calm that follows a domestic hurricane. The next, a pillar of blue-green light exploded from the coffee table, flooding the room with a thin, almost medicinal glow. Petty yelped and barreled under the couch, while Mittens, who'd taken up watch atop the TV cabinet, arched his back and released a sound that could have been the death rattle of civilization itself. Tom and Sarah, both stunned into stillness, stared as shapes, first mathematical, then fractal, then somehow architectural, began to assemble in midair, forming a slowly spinning cylinder. The hum that filled the room vibrated through Sarah's molars and made Tom's nose itch. Sarah found her voice first. Is that for us?" Tom squinted at the hologram, then at the ceiling, then at Sarah. "It's in our house. Unless it's a really aggressive neighborgram, I'd say yes." The spinning cylinder burst outward, shattering into a constellation of shimmering symbols. They hung in the air, incomprehensible, before collapsing into a single glowing rectangle that floated eye level above the coffee table. Text began to scroll, first in a fluid script neither of them recognized, then, after a pregnant pause, in perfect, centered English. "Royal decree, forthcoming visit of Her Most Serene Gravity, Queen Extrata of the Trine Expanse. Selected human residence, 233 Greenvale Circle. Compliance with the following protocols is required for the safety and dignity of all parties." A smaller line of text winked into existence beneath. "Any deviation will result in immediate censure or other remedies. See Section 43B, Host Planet Negotiation Treaty." Sarah felt her teacher's brain engage. Scan, sort, summarize. She groped for a notebook, found one under the couch, along with Petie, who was shivering and looking at the hologram like it was an incoming asteroid, and clicked her pen with military urgency. The list began. First, a chamber of rest arrayed with cushions of anti-gravitational support, no less than 5 per visitor, no common pillows, offensive to royal posteriors. Second, continuous access to flowing hydration, ideally in vessel shapes that express upward aspiration, no glass with angles below 27 degrees. Cups with anthropomorphic faces encouraged. Third, strict feeding schedule for chromatic algae to be sourced from a reputable Terran cultivator. See Appendix Q for certified vendors. Fourth, absolutely no electromagnetic interruptions between the hours of 10 and 16 local time. 5. A daily entertainment hour featuring music of emotional nuance and minimal percussion. Sixth, no depictions of predatory animals, including but not limited to wolves, raptors, aquatic mammals, or representations of the noble house cat. See Section 5E. Seventh, guest quarters to be diffused with aroma. Resonant nectar, hue shifting, origin, planetary. See Appendix F. The list scrolled on, a bureaucrat's fever dream. Sarah's hand cramped as she tried to keep pace, abbreviating wildly. What even is chromatic algae? She muttered, flipping a page. And how do you source it from a reputable Terran cultivator in the next 24 hours? Tom leaned in, peering at the projection with a look of mingled horror and admiration. I mean, you have to respect the thoroughness. They even have legal disclaimers. Look, all hosting obligations subject to reversal upon satisfactory completion of negotiation phase. Sarah grabbed her phone and started Googling anti-gravity cushion DIY. The first result was a pop-up ad for spine alignment pillows and a YouTube video titled, Float Your Butt, Homemade Levitation Pads. She stifled a groan. The hologram pulsed again, as if demanding attention. A line of small blinking symbols appeared at the bottom of the decree. Failure to comply will be recorded and reflected in the official diplomatic history of your species. Tom couldn't hold it in anymore. He doubled over, laughing hard enough that he had to brace himself against the arm of the couch. Stop, stop, this isn't funny! Sarah swatted at him with her notebook, but he only laughed harder. Reflected in the official diplomatic history, like they're going to put it in the yearbook, most likely to start an interstellar incident? Sarah fought a smile, but her anxiety overruled it. If we mess this up, it's not just us. It's the whole planet, or at the very least, the entire neighborhood HOA. The hologram's blue-green light made her skin look sallow. She wondered if aliens would take that as a sign of disrespect. Tom, perhaps sensing the spike in her stress level, sobered instantly. He reached out and rested a hand on her arm, squeezing gently. We'll figure it out. It's like throwing a birthday party for the principal. Just times a million. She flipped back to the first page of her notes, already creased and covered with frantic scribbles. We need 5 anti-gravity cushions, something that floats, and no normal pillows. Petey's dog bed is basically a memory foam marshmallow. Maybe we can start there. He nodded, putting his own scientist brain to work. And if we rig up some fans underneath, maybe with magnets, you could do a hover effect, at least for a minute or two. Sarah ignored the voice in her head that screamed, You are not an engineer, and started a shopping list. Algae next. There's a store in town, Cosmic Corners. They sell aquarium stuff. Maybe they'll have something colorful enough to pass for chromatic. Tom, newly energized, began scanning through the rest of the decree. Hydration vessels, so weird cups. I bet Kindra's old sippy cups would qualify if we stick googly eyes on them. Sarah nearly wept with relief. Yes, that's one thing down. The projection's voice, which had been silent until now, suddenly filled the room. It was low and melodic, with just enough mechanical resonance to make it clear it wasn't human. Host family, please acknowledge receipt of royal decree and indicate understanding of all requirements. Deadline for full compliance, local time, 8:03 tomorrow. Sarah and Tom stared at each other. Do we have to talk to it? Tom whispered. Sarah shrugged, feeling every molecule in her body tense. She stood, faced the glowing rectangle, and spoke as clearly as she could. We acknowledge and will comply. The hologram shimmered, then spit out a disk of light that hovered in place. For your convenience, a translation module is provided. Please consult this device for clarifications and legal guidance. The Queen's arrival will be preceded by a formal audit at the designated hour. Tom reached for the light disk, and as soon as he touched it, it collapsed into a palm-sized crystal, warm and vibrating. We are not returning this to the library, he said, marveling. Sarah sat heavily. Tom, this can't be real, can it? Queen Extrata of the Trine Expanse? He shrugged, still turning the crystal over in his hands. If it's a prank, it's the most expensive prank in history. He looked up at her, eyes serious for the first time all morning. It's real, or at least it's really happening to us. And we have exactly 24 hours to figure out what pulsating nectar is and where to get it before they arrive. Tom grinned, running a hand through his hair. On the bright side, the kids are going to think this is the best sleepover ever. Sarah put her head in her hands, then peeked through her fingers. What are we going to tell them? He thought for a minute. We say there's a special guest coming, that we're on a top secret mission. Kids love that stuff. She exhaled, the beginnings of a plan slotting into place. First, we survive the audit. Then, we get the kids involved. Then, maybe, we save the world. The blue-green light seemed to pulse in agreement. They stood together side by side, gazing at the clock. 23:59:12, 23:59:11, 23:59:10. The countdown had begun. Chapter 3. At 10:47 a.m., with Kyle and Kindra finally subdued by back-to-back episodes of Galactic Rangers and now snoring in their room, Sarah and Tom sat hip to hip at the kitchen table, attacking the alien etiquette manual like it was a crossword puzzle with world peace at stake. The manual itself was a rectangular slab of flexible glass, roughly the size and weight of a jumbo lasagna noodle, and covered in scrolling animated hieroglyphs. The outer box, which had arrived via a non-Euclidean mail slot during breakfast, proudly declared Trine Cultural Primer, now with 7D illustrative context, as if that clarified anything. Sarah stared at a looping animation of what looked like a squid folding itself into a pretzel, then flicking its tentacles in alternating directions. Next to it, a blizzard of indecipherable blue symbols scrolled by, the only English word being hospitality. Tom traced a finger along the screen, as if that would will it to make sense. Okay, he said, pointing at a blob with 3 stalks. This is definitely a greeting. Or a threat display. No, look, the next sequence is a smaller blob doing a bow. That means the first blob's action is socially dominant. So, we bow. She pursed her lips. If we bow, and it's a threat display, we're basically surrendering. Tom considered. Maybe it's more about deference. The next section shows the little blob offering something. Food, maybe. Sarah's hand drifted to her notepad, where she'd already filled a page with bullet points and question marks. Always present food after greeting, she wrote. Assume aggressive posture? Or not. Check on that. She scrolled to a new section, this one showing the 2 blobs, now green and pink, sitting on floating pads and shoving a third blob, shiny, glittering, slightly jiggling, back and forth between them. That has to be the chromatic algae, she said. Or a pet, Tom offered. Or a sport. They locked eyes, the same thought blooming in both brains. There was no way to prepare for every possible misstep. Sarah slumped in her chair. Maybe we're overthinking this. Maybe they won't care if we mess up a little. Maybe they'll be charmed by our... She gestured to the house, now equal parts sterile and disaster zone. Humanity, Tom snorted. That's not how royalty works. Not here, and definitely not in space. A loud snort from the baby monitor signaled the end of nap time, and Kindra's voice carried down the hall. Mommy, where's my juice? Sarah massaged her temples. We don't even know if they have a concept of juice. She rose, abandoning the etiquette manual to its looping, tentacular mysteries, and padded to the hallway to intercept the kids before they could add another layer of entropy to the day. Tom stayed with the manual, sketching wild diagrams in the margins of Sarah's notepad, determined to decode the symbolic universe before their guests arrived. Sarah found Kindra dangling one arm out of the crib, eyes half open, hair in a thicket of sleep-induced tangles. Kyle had already escaped and was, judging by the sound of blocks clattering in the next room, deep into infrastructure planning. Sarah scooped up Kindra, checked for sticky patches, miraculously none, and carried her to the kitchen. She set her on a booster seat and filled a sippy cup with water. Kindra stared at the glowing etiquette slab and then at Tom, who was now making blob shapes with his hands. Daddy's doing homework? Kindra asked, skeptical. Daddy's trying to save the planet, Sarah replied, and instantly regretted it. Kindra considered this, then nodded solemnly. Be careful with aliens, Daddy. Some of them are not nice. I'll be careful, Tom promised, sending a help me look across the table. Sarah plopped herself back down and returned to the checklist. We need chromatic algae, anti-gravity cushions, and, she squinted at her own handwriting, vessels of upward aspiration, plus music for emotional nuance. The thrift store. They have those weird champagne flutes shaped like rocket ships. You grab the Cosmic Corners stuff, I'll tackle the thrift. She nodded, relieved to have at least a battle plan, and started gathering her things. As she wrangled her coat, her phone buzzed. An incoming message from her principal. Saw the news. Are you actually hosting royalty? If so, please promote STEM to our visitors and keep receipts for any school-related purchases. Sarah barked out a short, helpless laugh. Then, armed with a sticky note shopping list, she herded Kindra into her car seat and braced herself for the cosmic strangeness of Cosmic Corners. Cosmic Corners was a local legend, half exotic pet store, half aquarium supply, and a full 10% unexplainable chaos. The outside was plastered with hand-painted signs, terra flume tanks, live fungus. And inside, Sarah was immediately enveloped in the scent of wet gravel, brine, and vaguely illegal cheese. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a Van Dyke beard and the energy of a retired wizard, looked up from feeding a vat of shrimp. Well, if it isn't the school teacher, how can I help you today? His accent wandered between regions, never landing anywhere in particular. Sarah clutched her list. I need chromatic algae? He pursed his lips, then led her to a wall of tanks, each bubbling with different shades of blue and purple. You want the basic bioluminescent, or are you looking for a little extra? He wagged his eyebrows. Extra, Sarah said. Also, do you have pulsating nectar? The wizardly man grinned, reached under the counter, and produced a glowing sealed jar filled with a viscous iridescent liquid. Been waiting for someone to ask for this. Just came in yesterday. He held it like an Olympic medal, then slipped it into a paper bag. Anything else, or is this a school project gone mad? Sarah looked around. Do you have resonant aroma diffusers for a planetary queen? The shopkeeper didn't blink. He simply led her to a shelf lined with odd three-legged vials, each topped with a bulbous crystal. My cousin designed these. Never got FDA approval, but they smell better than most air fresheners. She loaded up her basket, adding impulse purchases as she went. A packet of edible moss, a sack of fluorescent pebbles, and, on a whim, 3 packets of party plankton. It claimed to guarantee an out-of-this-world soiree. Kindra, who'd been quietly watching the shrimp tank, now attempted to pet the algae through the glass, leaving handprints in her wake. The wizard packed up her haul with practiced speed. Tell your husband I said hi, he said as she paid, and good luck with the interstellar in-laws. Sarah almost corrected him, then thought better of it. Thanks, and if we survive, I'll bring you a souvenir. Back in the car, Kindra immediately fell asleep, clutching the sack of party plankton. The drive home was short, but Sarah's brain was racing with scenarios. What if the algae needed to be alive? What if the queen was allergic to resonant nectar? What if they failed the audit and humanity was relegated to the cosmic equivalent of a timeshare in Ohio? When she got home, Tom had already returned, arms full of rocket ship flutes and a thrift store bag bristling with silver capes. The kids were awake, and Kyle, clearly briefed on the mission, ran up with his own addition to the cause, a hand-drawn banner that read in shaky crayon, Welcome Queen Extrada. Sarah could have wept from pride. She set the chromatic algae on the dining table, and the entire room glowed a gentle violet. Tom whistled in appreciation. If this doesn't impress her, nothing will. They got to work. Kyle and Kindra were assigned to fluff every pillow in the house, with strict instructions on which ones not to use, while Sarah set up the aroma diffusers and tested the pulsating nectar with a medicine dropper. It fizzed and hissed, then sent up a spiral of sweet, citrusy steam. Tom, ever the engineer, set up a demo for the anti-gravity cushions in the garage, using a surplus of packing peanuts and a leaf blower. It worked for about 3 seconds before the entire contraption detonated in a confetti storm. The kids shrieked with delight. Sarah, scraping foam out of her hair, added vacuum to the list. By late afternoon, the house looked more like a theme restaurant than a diplomatic residence, but Sarah felt a flicker of hope. They'd done it. They'd met the first day's impossible standards, or at least faked them well enough to bluff a galactic audit. She sank into the couch, closing her eyes. The room still smelled of citrus and ozone, and somewhere in the background, Kyle was reciting his welcome speech to the cat. Petie, now liberated from under the couch, was doing slow laps of the living room, wearing a silver thrift store cape and looking surprisingly regal. Sarah allowed herself one luxurious breath before the baby monitor chirped again and the sound of Kindra screaming, "No, you can't have my juice!" echoed down the stairs. She opened her eyes, found Tom's, and grinned. "We can do this," she whispered. He nodded as the clock above the TV blinked. 17:58. 14 hours and counting. It was going to be a long night. Chapter 4. Sarah and Tom had survived, if only barely, the first wave of cosmic protocol. But now that the house was stocked with glittering algae, hallways diffused with resonant aroma, and every visible drinking vessel sporting googly eyes or a NASA logo, there was the small matter of making the house actually safe for a guest who, presumably, hovered. Sarah was on her hands and knees, taping thick layers of bubble wrap around the coffee table legs. Petie hovered beside her, tail wagging so hard it made her vision vibrate. Every time she tore off a strip of tape, the pit bull leapt forward as if it were the starting gun for a relay race. Across the room, Tom was hunched over the anti-gravity cushion prototype, an ottoman with the family trampoline's old springs grafted to the bottom and topped with 3 of Kyle's deflated soccer balls. He bounced a heavy book onto it and watched, wincing as it shot straight up and then immediately collapsed sideways. Kyle cheered from the safety of the staircase. Try the big dictionary next. Sarah risked a glance at the etiquette manual, which still pulsed with unread alerts. Somewhere in there was probably a warning about what to do when the Queen's entourage was impaled on a rogue end table, but she was out of patience and tape. She stepped back to survey her work. The living room now looked like a crash test facility, with every hard surface padded, rounded, or covered in brightly colored pool noodles. The pillows had been stacked into improbable towers, each topped with a handmade sign, "Welcome, safe for all posteriors." Sarah made her way to the kitchen, where the next round of hazards awaited. She opened the fridge and stared at the row of glowing jars, the shopkeeper's parting words echoing in her head. Mix only at room temperature and never with carbonated water. She'd bought extra seltzer just in case. She reached for the jar of pulsating nectar. As she uncapped it, the contents shimmered and released a faintly musical ping, like the world's tiniest singing bowl. She poured it into the party flutes, and the liquid climbed the sides of the glass in slow, coiling spirals like it couldn't decide which way was down. Satisfied, she labeled each glass with a post-it, "For royalty only." On the counter, the chromatic algae bloomed under the under-cabinet lights. Kyle had named them Mr. Wiggly and Princess Sparkle, and as far as Sarah could tell, their main function was to gently undulate and look expensive. She peered at the etiquette manual's entry on algae presentation, then arranged the jars on a tray nested in a ring of party plankton. It was, all things considered, the prettiest science experiment she'd ever conducted. She was just about to call Tom for a final sweep when she heard the familiar thud, thud, thud of running feet. She braced herself. "Mom!" Kyle barreled into the kitchen, clutching a stack of his own drawings. "I made more signs. They say no cats allowed, because the manual says cats are predators and maybe the Queen will be scared." Sarah knelt, taking the signs. "That's very thoughtful, but Mittens lives here too. We'll just tell him to stay in your room, okay?" "How come the Queen floats? Will her feet ever touch the ground?" Sarah blinked. She'd been so obsessed with not offending their guest that she hadn't considered what the kids might think. I'm not sure. Maybe it's how she says hello, like a handshake, but cooler." Kyle absorbed this, then grinned. "I hope she lets us try." Sarah ruffled his hair, then shooed him back to the living room, where Tom was using a power drill to mount the last of the tripods. Each tripod was topped with a shimmering orb, and each orb emitted a low, continuous hum. "Do you think these actually do anything?" Tom asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. "No idea. But the manual says place throughout the dwelling for optimal ambiance and mediation of external gravitational flux. So, yeah, we'll call it science." Tom nodded, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "It's like living inside a lava lamp." Sarah bit back a laugh, feeling the fatigue finally catch up to her. "Have we forgotten anything? Is there a protocol for last-minute panic?" Tom shrugged. "Just one. We haven't told the kids what to expect." The reality landing like a dropped bowling ball. "How do you explain to a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old that our guests might float?" Tom considered. "The same way we explain Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and why they can't eat candy for breakfast. We make it up?" Sarah slumped into a chair, the adrenaline drain leaving her giddy. "We'll figure it out," she said, and for the first time, she believed it. At precisely 7:03, Sarah made the final circuit of the house. She passed the living room, where Kyle was adjusting a pillow tower to ensure maximum posterior comfort. She ducked into the den, where Kindra had gathered every stuffed animal into a jury box, presumably to witness the arrival of the Queen. In the hallway, she almost tripped over Petie, who had taken up sentry duty beside the front door. And in the kitchen, Mittens crouched on the highest cabinet, eyes glowing in the new, humming light. Sarah caught his gaze, and for a second she almost apologized for the coming invasion of personal space. She straightened, grabbed the etiquette manual, and placed it on the coffee table, directly under the spinning hologram that had counted down all day to 0. The moment the clock hit 8:03, every tripod orb in the house flared from blue to radiant white. The tripods began to pulse in unison, sending a soft, harmonic vibration through the furniture and into Sarah's bones. Petie howled. Mittens vanished behind a row of cereal boxes. The lights in the house dimmed, then held steady. The room was silent, except for the low, welcoming hum. Sarah and Tom stood in the entryway, holding hands as the kids pressed in close, wide-eyed and shivering with anticipation. From somewhere outside, a sound like a choir inhaling. Sarah grinned, tension melting from her shoulders. "Showtime," she whispered. And in the charged, impossible calm before the doorbell's first chime, the Petersons, fur, bubble wrap, and all, were finally perfectly ready. Chapter 5. The first indication that the neighbors received was not the silver dot descending from the thin Ohio clouds, but the synchronized migration of every lawn ornament, bird, and rodent within a half-block radius. The ground rippled. Sprinklers performed a brief collective tap dance, and the identical flower beds of Greenvale Circle erupted in dandelion seeds that hung in the air like a momentary snowstorm. The silver vessel, less a ship than a floating, gently humming extrusion of geometry, drifted down with the slow, deliberate certainty of a garage door in need of servicing. It hovered 2 feet above the Petersons' freshly mowed, cross-hatched lawn. For 3 seconds, there was only silence, except for the distant, shocked yelp of a beagle whose morning routine had just been upended. Then the vessel's landing feet emerged, as if the ship were reluctantly changing out of pajamas and into work-appropriate shoes. The touchdown was soft, but the ripple of displaced air flipped a Little League banner 3 lawns away and sent the HOA president's "Welcome to Greenvale" flag into the recycling bin. Inside the Peterson house, the low-frequency hum translated into an immediate and total collapse of Petey's composure. The Pitbull, already at orange alert after a morning of cosmic suspense, went straight to DEFCON 1. He charged the living room window and threw himself against it with the full, undiluted mass of a dog who, in a prior life, had probably been a battering ram. Sarah abandoned the last futile swipe of Lysol and lunged for Petey's collar, narrowly preventing him from launching through the screen and achieving interplanetary fame as the first dog to make contact. She yanked him back, locked her arms around his broad chest, and hissed, "Not today." Petey responded by vibrating at a pitch just shy of glass shattering and blasting her ear canal with high-velocity panting. Tom, in the dining room, adjusted his shirt for the 5th time in 2 minutes. He checked his reflection in the microwave door, then in the oven, then in the back of a spoon. Each time, his hair seemed to reassemble itself into a less dignified shape, until he finally surrendered and slicked it back with a handful of the kids' glitter-infused hair gel. He had gone for diplomat and landed somewhere between weather anchor and witness protection. Kyle and Kindra pressed themselves against the front window, creating twin smears on the glass that instantly undid a week's worth of Sarah's vigilance. Behind them, the homemade "Welcome Alien Queen" banner drooped under its own weight, the tape struggling to cling to the freshly wiped surface. Kyle jabbed his finger at the descending ship, breath fogging the pane, while Kindra tried to climb onto his shoulders for a better view. Out on the street, the neighborhood's early risers and power walkers came to an unspoken halt. Phones appeared, strollers froze in place. The local mailman, normally impervious to the goings-on of his route, stopped mid-stride and instinctively used the nearest minivan as cover. The HOA president, resplendent in a golf shirt and matching visor, emerged from his house with clipboard held high, as if he could write this away with enough documentation. Sarah, still grappling with Petey, called out, "Tom, are they supposed to land on the grass?" He peeked around the kitchen doorway, hands already shaking with the first stirrings of adrenaline. There wasn't anything in the manual about lawn etiquette. Just, no aggressive displays of territoriality. "Well, too late," Sarah muttered, as Petey lunged for the window again. From the kitchen, the humming orbs, now tastefully mounted on thrift store tripods, began to pulse in unison, as if preparing for an alien symphony. The house's bubble wrap enhancements had the effect of muting every sound, turning the tension into a thick, suffocating cloud. The resin aroma diffusers pumped out another round of resonant nectar, and the citrus tang was now strong enough to induce a flash migraine in anyone not genetically engineered for the scent. Sarah maneuvered Petey into the hallway, where she barricaded him behind a baby gate and knelt for a face-to-snout pep talk. "You are not to lick, bark at, or otherwise slime the queen, understand? Royalty, Petie, dignity." The Pitbull responded with a low, warbling whine, which Sarah took as a legally binding promise. She stood, checked her reflection in the hall mirror, and tried to repair the damage. The blue light from the etiquette slab washed out her face, giving her the look of a woman caught halfway through a dental x-ray. She smoothed her shirt, fluffed her hair, and practiced a smile that could pass for confidence. "We can do this," she whispered, and almost believed it. The kids were vibrating with excitement, which in the Peterson home meant Kindra was reciting every space movie catchphrase she knew. "Prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile. Take me to your leader." While Kyle provided color commentary, "That's not what the ship looked like on YouTube. This is way smoother, like a juice box with wings." Tom, ever the scientist, was already cataloging details. "Surface is unpainted. There's no visible propulsion. Maybe magnetogravitic drive?" Sarah shot him a look. "I doubt they'll let you pop the hood." He shrugged, already reaching for the etiquette manual, which now displayed a series of increasingly frantic alerts. "Guests arriving. Initiate primary greeting sequence. Do not deviate." The words flashed, then were replaced by a looping animation of two humanoids bowing with elaborate sweeping gestures. Sarah positioned herself beside the door, Tom close behind. She inhaled, exhaled, and counted to 4. She reviewed the list in her head. Bow, but not too low. Maintain eye contact unless pupil dilation exceeds 1.8 times baseline. No jokes about probing. Absolutely no jokes about tentacles. Outside, the ship's hatch hissed open. The noise was softer than Sarah had imagined. No Hollywood airlock klaxon, just a gentle exhalation, like a bread machine finishing a perfect loaf. A gangplank, if you could call it that, unfurled and set itself precisely atop the family's brick walkway, aligning so perfectly with the step that Sarah felt a pang of resentment at the show-offy precision. For a long moment, nothing happened. The neighbors pressed closer, phones up, and the HOA president took a single, defiant step onto the curb, as if to lay claim to the event. The first figure out of the hatch was not what Sarah had expected. She'd spent all week bracing for the uncanny valley, for bug eyes and tentacles, and maybe the lingering trauma of late-night sci-fi. Instead, the being that emerged was tall, yes, easily 6'5" in heels, which it wore, but also slender, stately, and draped in what looked, at first glance, like a single piece of silvery cloth that shimmered between states of solid and transparent. Its face was a clean, unbroken oval, the features arranged in a way that suggested high fashion and zero tolerance for nonsense. Its arms were folded. It surveyed the street with a gaze that could have flash-frozen lava. Sarah recognized the body language at once. The queen had arrived, and she was not impressed. Two more figures emerged behind her. The first was smaller, rounder, and wore a sash of pink sequins and an expression of barely restrained glee. The second was a stately individual in a midnight jumpsuit, clutching a folder and scribbling notes on a thin, glassy tablet. They flanked the queen with the practiced choreography of seasoned bodyguards or possibly extremely competent wedding planners. At the bottom of the ramp, the queen paused. She turned, made a series of crisp gestures, and the entourage snapped to attention. Then, all three beings advanced toward the Petersons' front door. Inside, the temperature dropped, or maybe it was just the sudden evaporation of all blood from Sarah's face. She straightened her blouse, wiped her palms on her jeans, and signaled the kids to stand by. Kyle squared his shoulders. Kindra struck a pose she'd learned from the Space Unicorns cartoon. Tom gripped the etiquette manual like a shield. Sarah put her hand on the doorknob. She could feel the faint vibration of the ship outside, could hear the murmur of neighbors' anticipation, could sense the 1,000 eyes trained on her and her family. She looked back at Tom. "Remember what the manual said about proper greetings?" He nodded, swallowing hard. Bowing, eye contact, no tentacle jokes. She took one last, steadying breath. "Here goes nothing." The doorbell rang. The Petersons' destiny, and possibly that of all suburban humanity, was at hand. Chapter 6. Sarah opened the door. On the porch stood the queen, unmistakably so, even for a woman who had never before entertained extraterrestrial royalty. She radiated a composure so absolute that it seemed to flatten the air around her. Her eyes were not quite human, or perhaps more human than was strictly polite, and she regarded Sarah with a slow, ascending glance that suggested she was already composing a review for the cosmic equivalent of Yelp. Queen Xylos wore a gown that appeared to be both poured from quicksilver and woven from static electricity. The fabric shifted as she moved, each step warping the light and pulling at the nerves of anyone watching. Her arms were crossed in front of her, a gesture that could have been formal restraint or supreme boredom. The queen stepped forward, all 6'5" of her, heels included, and fixed Sarah with a look that made her instantly regret every dust bunny, every scuffed baseboard, every slightly askew picture frame in the house. Trailing behind the queen, Prince Zorg entered like he'd been waiting all his life for this moment. He wore a sash, pink and sequined, draped diagonally across his otherwise understated uniform. His smile was broad, earnest, and possibly genuine. He executed an elaborate bow, nearly folding himself in half, before popping upright and flashing a wink at Kyle and Kindra. If royalty ever did birthday parties, Prince Zorg would be booked solid. Then came the three attendants, each perfectly identical in stature and affect, wearing narrow black uniforms and stern expressions. They fanned out, hands behind their backs, eyes darting over every surface and object in the entryway. One attendant produced a slim device and began silently taking readings from the wallpaper, pausing to run a finger along the crown molding as if searching for evidence of illicit snack residue. Another knelt to sniff the air, then frowned at the aroma diffusers. A third scrutinized the homemade banner before scribbling something on a tablet. Behind Sarah, Petie let out a single piercing yowl before Sarah could shush him into silence. The queen's eyes flicked toward the sound, then away, as if she had already seen and dismissed all possible canine variables. "Honored guests," Sarah began, voice wobbly but determined, "please accept our home as your temporary planetary station of comfort." Tom, on cue, stepped forward and tried to bow, but years of lower back neglect betrayed him. He managed a dip that ended in an awkward half lunge, which he attempted to disguise as a sweeping gesture toward the living room. The queen did not blink. Instead, she unfurled her arms, placed her hands together in what could only be described as a gesture of measured tolerance, and glided past them into the house. The rest of the party followed with military precision. Kyle, who'd spent the whole morning memorizing fun facts for their visitors, summoned his courage. "Queen Xylar, did you know that the air on Earth is 78% nitrogen and only 21% oxygen?" The queen paused. She regarded Kyle for a moment, then turned to her closest attendant, who produced a small notepad and jotted down a single word. "Yes," the queen replied, in a voice that was low, velvet, and capable of crushing dissent with a single syllable. "We have noticed." Prince Zorg, more affable, bent down to eye level with Kindra, who was now hiding behind her mother's leg. "Is that a glimmer pod?" he asked, pointing to the jar of bioluminescent algae on the console table. Kindra, unsure, nodded. "It's Mr. Wiggly." "Excellent choice," said the prince with the gentle diplomacy of a substitute teacher subbing for pre-K. He flashed another grin, and Kindra's fear dissolved into giggles. The parade of dignitaries proceeded to the living room, where the bubble-wrapped coffee table and towers of pillows awaited. The queen halted, took a panoramic survey, and zeroed in on the humming orb mounted near the fireplace. She leaned in, examining the device with the predatory focus of a biologist discovering an invasive species in her own garden. She turned to Sarah and raised a single eyebrow, a gesture that translated universally to "explain yourself." Sarah, channeling every ounce of Midwestern hospitality, smiled and said, "It's a mediation of external gravitational flux, just as requested." The queen inclined her head a fraction of a degree. "Acceptable." Tom, desperate to recover ground, gestured to the array of snacks on the counter: La Croix, string cheese, and a ceremonial tray of rotisserie chicken. "We weren't sure what your preferences were, so we selected a variety." Before he could finish, one of the attendants reached out, plucked the top can from the stack, and performed a rapid series of scans. "Carbonation levels suboptimal," they declared in a perfectly flat tone, before setting the can aside with palpable disappointment. The second attendant approached Kindra's craft station, which was still covered in a thin dusting of glitter. He stared nonplussed, then turned to the queen. "It is reflectively offensive," he said, pronouncing each syllable with deliberate care. The queen nodded, lips pressed in a line. She gestured, and the attendant immediately swept the surface with a small, handheld device that vacuumed up every visible flake. At the other end of the room, Prince Zorg had discovered Kyle's Hot Wheels collection. He picked up a battered toy Camaro, rolled it back and forth, and appraised the design. "Primitive ratio of wheelbase to chassis," he said, smiling at Kyle as if this were high praise. Kyle beamed. "You should see my ramps." Prince Zorg looked genuinely intrigued. "Perhaps later." Tom, realizing that he was rapidly losing control of the narrative, seized the etiquette manual and began frantically flipping through its luminous pages, searching for the section on remediation of minor protocol breaches. He found it, only to discover that the recommended remedy involved something called submissive posture and rhythmic hums. He glanced at Sarah, who shook her head, pleading, "Don't." The queen, who had been silently absorbing every detail, finally turned to face the family. "We are prepared to begin the greeting protocol," she announced. "Compliance has been observed. However, there are deviations." She glanced pointedly at Petey, who was now gnawing a bubble-wrapped chair leg with wild abandon, then at the glitterless but otherwise unchanged craft table. Sarah felt her face flush. "We apologize for the imperfections. We will remediate immediately." The queen's lips twitched, perhaps not quite a smile, but something in the vicinity. "Your candor is noted." Tom cleared his throat and attempted a second bow. "We are honored to host you. If there is anything we can provide—" The queen raised her hand, cutting him off with supernatural grace. "The protocol will continue as scheduled." She turned to the prince in attendance, issued a single musical command, and they formed a semicircle around the family. Sarah, who had survived 2 natural births, a school-wide lice outbreak, and the Thursday morning playground incident, felt her knees lock in place. Kindra reached for her hand. Kyle gripped Tom's sleeve. The house was silent, save for the soft whir of the aroma diffusers and the faint thud of Petey's tail against the wall. Sarah inhaled. It smelled like citrus and destiny. The greeting ritual was about to begin. Chapter 7. The greeting ritual, according to the etiquette manual, was supposed to proceed as follows. The host family would present themselves in a semi-formal arrangement. Close together, signifying unity, but not so close as to suggest groupthink or secret conspiracy, then bow at a 45-degree angle. The queen, in turn, would initiate reciprocal acknowledgement, and depending on satisfaction with the household's efforts, might extend a hand, an antenna, or simply a knowing glance. Under no circumstances was the host to make physical contact first, or attempt to outbow the dignitary. The manual, as it turned out, had not accounted for Sarah Peterson's default greeting settings. As soon as Queen Xylos indicated readiness, Sarah, running entirely on hospitality muscle memory, stepped forward and offered her hand. She did it without thinking, just the crisp, friendly handshake she'd used on every new parent, every teacher, every cable repairman who had ever crossed her threshold. Queen Xylos' face didn't change, but her posture did. She went stiff, spine perfectly vertical, and took a small step back. The attendants' hands hovered over their utility belts, which seemed suddenly far more menacing than a minute ago. Even Prince Zorg's smile faded by a few degrees, replaced by an anxious, sideways glance at his mother. Sarah realized her error a heartbeat too late. She snatched her hand back, panicked, and performed an involuntary bow that was both too deep and too fast. Somewhere in the background, the sound of Petey's whine ratcheted up an octave, as if even the dog knew a major protocol breach had just occurred. There was a beat of absolute stillness. Then Prince Zorg leapt into the void, filling the awkward silence with what must have been a pre-rehearsed salvage maneuver. He swept his arm in front of him and executed a bow so elaborate, so excessive, that it not only reset the vibe, but also sent his sequined sash flying up into his own face. In his recovery, he overbalanced and bumped the corner of the pillow tower, sending the topmost cushion spinning into the air. It arced, briefly beautiful, and then clipped the edge of a standing lamp, which toppled with the melodramatic slowness of a tree in a cartoon. The lamp hit the ground, bulb first, and burst in a satisfying pop, releasing a flurry of static sparks that drifted down onto the carpet. Mittens, the cat, who had been observing from the relative safety of the mantelpiece, took this as an omen and launched himself behind the sofa, scattering a wave of loose glitter in his wake. "Most esteemed visitors of the 7th quadrant, we offer our humble dwelling for your comfort and mutual understanding. Please forgive any deviations from your custom, for it is our highest—" He was cut off by the queen, who, in a move both regal and chilling, raised her hand and produced a sound not unlike the tuning of 1,000 crystal wine glasses. The effect was immediate. Every human and several non-human in the room felt a deep, resonant tingling in their skulls, a sensation at once soothing and mildly electric. Sarah blinked. For a moment, she could see herself from the outside, slumped in an overbowed apology, her children clutching at her sides, her husband trying to rescue dignity from the jaws of defeat. It was embarrassing, yes, but also weirdly comforting. If the queen could telepathically transmit mortification, maybe she also knew how to forgive it. But the welcome pulse didn't stop at the humans. It ricocheted through the living room, vibrating the air, the furniture, and every brittle object in a 3-meter radius. The ceiling fixture rattled, the wall clock did a brief, unscheduled cha-cha, and the row of empty La Croix cans on the kitchen counter jumped in place like tiny caffeinated soldiers. The lamp, already prone, vibrated a few inches across the carpet before coming to rest against a beanbag chair. Mittens, sensing imminent existential threat, let out a banshee shriek and burrowed deeper behind the cushions. Then, as the welcome pulse reached its crescendo, Petie, who, unbeknownst to all, had managed to wriggle free of the baby gate, burst into the room. He wore his silver thrift store cape, now tied around his neck with Kindra's rainbow hair ties, and threw himself between the queen and the family with a single heroic bark. What happened next was either a testament to the adaptability of the Xylosian people or to the complete unpredictability of Terran fauna. Queen Xyler did not flinch. She held out her hand, palm up, and fixed Petie with a look that said, "You may proceed with your demonstration." Petie, misunderstanding the cue, promptly sat, rolled over, and wagged his tail at a speed that blurred the cape into a streak of metallic light. Prince Zorg was the first to laugh. It was a sharp, bright sound, almost musical, and it startled everyone into a momentary pause. He leaned down, still giggling, and scratched Petie behind the ears, an act that, according to the etiquette manual, should have resulted in total diplomatic collapse. Instead, the queen merely observed, unmoving, while the three attendants made a series of frantic notations on their tablets. Sarah, unsure of the new script, defaulted to apology mode. She bowed again, this time so low her forehead grazed her knees. "We are deeply sorry," she said, voice muffled, "for the breach. The dog, he's not usually—" But Prince Zorg waved away the apology. "On my planet," he said, beaming at the children, "dogs are considered the highest form of terrestrial life. Many have served on the Royal Council." He looked to the Queen for confirmation. She gave the slightest of nods. The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by a giddy, post-chaos relief. Tom, still holding the etiquette manual, exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. He managed a nervous laugh. "Well, perhaps we can offer a tour of the house." The Queen, her face inscrutable, said, "We would be honored." They moved as a unit, Tom leading, kids flanking, Sarah bringing up the rear, still not sure if she was walking or floating. The royals and their attendants glided after them, pausing to examine every artifact of human existence. A row of sports trophies, a science fair ribbon, a handprint in plaster, a bowl of individually wrapped butterscotch candies. They arrived at the kitchen, where the rotating display of chromatic algae glimmered in the indirect sunlight. The Queen lingered, running a finger along the rim of the jar, watching the algae pulse and shift. She turned to Sarah. "You have made this house accommodating." Sarah managed to smile. "We did our best." Prince Zorg, trailing Kindra, held up the glitter vacuum and asked, "May I operate this device?" Kindra nodded solemnly. "Only if you promise not to suck up Mr. Bear." "I promise," said the prince, and proceeded to clean the kitchen table with the precision of a seasoned intern. Out on the street, the crowd had grown. Neighbors pressed their faces to the glass. A local news crew was parked across the street, antenna pointed at the Peterson house. The HOA president was deep in negotiations with a pair of uniformed officers, possibly over the legality of extraterrestrial parking on a residential lot. Inside, the greeting ritual continued. The Queen settled herself on the largest pillow, folding her long legs beneath her, and regarded the Petersons with a new, almost maternal patience. Sarah, adrenaline finally fading, felt the weight of the moment. They had not ruined everything. They had not, despite every possible opportunity, started an intergalactic war. If anything, they had provided entertainment. She looked at Tom, at her kids, at Petie still basking in the prince's attention, and laughed. It was a small, relieved, slightly hysterical sound, but it broke the last ice in the room. The Queen allowed herself the faintest curve of a smile. "You have done well, Sarah Peterson. Your hospitality is memorable." From behind the couch, Mittens stuck out a paw in cautious greeting. It was, all things considered, the perfect beginning to a royal visit. Chapter 8. The first challenge of hosting alien royalty was not the language barrier, the fear of diplomatic disaster, or even the likelihood of intergalactic allergies. It was getting everyone to sit at the damn table. "Please, please, make yourselves comfortable," Sarah sang, doing her best to corral her own children, the Pitbull, 3 highly alert royal attendants, and, lest she forget, the Queen of the Trine Expanse herself, who regarded dining chairs with the same suspicion she reserved for unfamiliar forms of government. Protocol indicates seating should reflect local tradition, Tom said quietly, brandishing the etiquette manual like a legal defense. He hovered behind Sarah, posture half military, half hostage. Local tradition, Queen Xyler repeated, gaze flicking to each place setting, to the haphazard parade of mismatched plates, to the centerpiece of bioluminescent chromatic algae glowing in a punch bowl. She glided to the head of the table and remained standing until the others had arrayed themselves. Her spine was a plumb line, her gown flowing seamlessly onto the chair without ever creasing. Prince Zorg flanked her right, his sash now bedazzled with what Sarah could only hope were glitter stickers, and not some alien order of merit. He eyed the chromatic algae with unconcealed hunger, his lips twitching in anticipation. The three attendants stationed themselves behind their charges, each holding a tablet that projected ghostly displays into the air. The effect was somewhere between a high-stakes dinner party and the medical bay on a spaceship. Kyle and Kindra plopped down side by side, feet swinging, hands twitching at the ready. Kyle's eyes kept drifting to the Queen's heels, which, on closer inspection, did not actually touch the floor. Tom took his place at Sarah's left. She could feel his knee bouncing under the table, jittering like he'd mainlined espresso and terror in equal measure. Sarah cleared her throat. We have prepared a selection of familiar local dishes: chicken nuggets, mac and cheese, string cheese sticks. She gestured to the main platter, where the golden brown nuggets sweated under a dome of saran wrap. In their midst, a quartet of ornate crystalline jars radiated indigo light, labeled in her best cursive, with the Latin names she'd cribbed from cosmic corners. Next to those, the pulsating nectar set, served in champagne flutes so cheap they bent at the stem. Queen Xyler's eyes traced the table with an almost medical precision. Your presentation, she said after a pause, demonstrates enthusiasm. The corners of her mouth creaking under the strain. Tom, eager to get things moving, adopted his most genial host voice. Perhaps we begin with an exchange of customary nourishment? The Queen gave a gracious nod and extended her hand. One attendant sprang forward, produced a silver implement from within his sleeve, and skewered a nugget in a single, fluid motion. He deposited it onto the Queen's plate, then stepped back with a flourish. Prince Zorg followed suit, but with the algae. He uncapped the jar, inhaled deeply, and scooped a gelatinous glob onto his dish, where it shuddered and changed color in the ambient light. The Petersons watched in silence as the Queen and her son made an initial assessment of Earth cuisine. The Queen sliced the nugget with a diamond-edged blade, then examined the cross-section as though expecting to find a hidden blueprint. She took a bite, no, a sliver, chewed once, and swallowed. Acceptable, she declared, and inclined her head to the family. Kindra, emboldened, stabbed a mac and cheese noodle and aimed it for her mouth, but lost structural integrity halfway and dropped it onto the Queen's plate. Time dilated. The noodle glistened in its disgraceful glory. The Queen stared at it, then at Kindra, then at the etiquette attendant, who began to hyperventilate and flick through his manual with urgent two-finger swipes. I'm so sorry, Sarah began, but the Queen held up a hand. The youngling expresses directness, Xylar said. She speared the noodle with perfect precision, examined the bright yellow cheese, and after a pause, ate it. Prince Zorg, sensing opportunity, leaned toward Kindra. On our world, the young arrange their own plates. It fosters independence. Kindra grinned. Mom says I'm not allowed to use the big knives. That is sound doctrine, said Zorg, then turned to Tom. May I inquire about this vessel? He gestured to the juice box at Tom's elbow, which Tom had meant for Kyle, but now, in his panic, slid across the table to the prince. The Queen intercepted it before it reached her son. She inspected the box, squeezed it experimentally, then read the cartoon label aloud. Berry Blaster. She frowned. Do you extract the nourishment through the embedded reed? Sarah, mortified, blurted, It's a straw. You just, here, let me. She tore off the wrapper, jabbed the straw into the foil with a satisfying pop, and handed it back. The Queen accepted it as though she had been given the nuclear launch codes. She turned the juice box over, watching the liquid slosh behind the plastic, then passed it to Prince Zorg, who sipped with gusto. Xylar addressed Tom. You must puncture the vessel of nourishment with the provided spear. It is ritualistic? Tom considered the question. More a convenience. But yes, sometimes it's a contest of accuracy. He attempted a smile, but it landed closer to a wince. Sarah's shoulders began to loosen. Maybe, she thought, we can survive this meal without rewriting the Geneva Convention. Petie chose that moment to streak under the table, snout agleam with blue jelly from the sample platter. He launched himself into the air, trailing flecks of alien goo onto the queen's gown, and in a final act of exuberance, sneezed directly into an attendant's lap. A moment of silence in which Sarah could hear every blood cell in her body scream. The queen dabbed her sleeve with a napkin, eyes never leaving Sarah's. The attendant stared in horror as the jelly shimmered and slowly soaked through the fabric of his pants. Prince Zorg erupted in laughter, a series of bright staccato bursts that set the jellies on his plate quivering. Your animal is formidable, he said, reaching down to scratch Petie behind the ears. He exhibits the spirit of the hunt. Thank you, said Sarah, not sure if she was being complimented or given a warning. Meanwhile, the other two attendants huddled, cross-referencing their tablets, fingers flying. They whispered frantically, then approached the queen and delivered a brief, whispered report. Xylar nodded, her composure unshaken. According to protocol, the queen said, unrestrained animals at a ceremonial meal indicate either hospitality or profound disregard for the guest. Context suggests the former. Sarah snorted before she could stop herself, then covered the sound with a cough. Hospitality, she confirmed, the word emerging as a croak. Tom, in a last-ditch effort to salvage the situation, gestured toward the alien delicacies. We're very interested in learning more about your foods. Could you tell us about the chromatic algae? Prince Zorg, delighted, launched into a lecture. The glimmer pod, as you call it, is a staple at all state gatherings. Each color variation corresponds to a mood. Purple for conviviality, green for negotiation, orange for discreet hostility, and blue for peace. He pointed at the punch bowl, which was cycling rapidly from purple to blue and back. I believe your mixture will inspire complex conversation. Kyle, emboldened, reached for the bowl. Can I try some? Zorg beamed. By all means. Sarah had a flash of Kyle projectile vomiting at the queen's feet, but to her relief, he merely took a spoonful, winced, and said, It tastes like glue and bubblegum and, metal? A refined palate, said Zorg, and looked to the queen for confirmation. Xylar allowed herself the faintest smile. Dinner proceeded. The queen sampled each item, dissected it, discussed its texture with the nearest attendant, then arranged the remnants into geometric patterns on her plate. After each bite, she dabbed the corners of her mouth with a napkin, folding it into a perfect square before setting it aside. Kindra, freed from the threat of disaster, gleefully mashed her mac and cheese with her fork and flung the occasional noodle at Kyle. The prince reciprocated, catching one on the back of his hand and flicking it back with expert aim. The attendants watched, equal parts horrified and fascinated, updating their tablets with every deviation from expected protocol. Petie, having acquired a taste for blue jelly, made repeat circuits under the table. Sarah abandoned hope of controlling the dog and instead focused on not spilling her own drink. It was chaos, but a stable sort of chaos, a dinner party that had found its strange equilibrium. Sarah, emboldened by the lack of explosions or diplomatic emergencies, ventured a question. Do you have many state visits like this on your world? The queen regarded her for a long moment. Rarely. Our rituals are codified, predictable. It is instructive to observe variance. Tom, sensing the queen's mood, attempted a joke. Well, if you ever need more variance, you're welcome to dinner any time. Xylar regarded him with what might, to an optimist, be interpreted as amusement. We will note the invitation. The meal wound down, the food depleted, the chromatic algae glowing a satisfied indigo blue. The queen rose, her entourage following suit, and extended a hand. This time, Sarah did not hesitate, but simply bowed her head and nodded. You have hosted with distinction, the queen said. There will be a second phase of visitation. Please prepare accordingly. With that, she glided toward the living room, Prince Zorg and the attendants in tow. Kindra and Kyle trailed after, already plotting to introduce their royal guests to the wonders of trampoline wrestling. Tom exhaled, looked at Sarah, and said, We did it. Sarah surveyed the wreckage of her dining room, the blue paw prints on the tile, the sticky streaks on the wall, the faint aroma of citrus and panic. She grinned. We did, didn't we? From the hallway came the sound of Kindra, shrieking with delight. No, Prince Zorg, you have to bounce higher. Sarah shook her head, poured herself a glass of juice, and toasted the table. To variance, she said. To variance, echoed Tom. And somewhere down the hall, the queen of the Trine Expanse, ruler of 5 star systems, allowed herself to enjoy the chaos. Chapter 9. If the living room had once been the safe harbor of the Peterson household, it was now the bridge of an uneasy diplomatic vessel. The Queen and Prince Zorg stood before the flat-screen television like a pair of botanists encountering a particularly belligerent fern. Tom, anxious to perform, snatched up the remote and held it out for inspection. "This is how we select our entertainment," he said, thumbing the volume up and down in an act of technological peacocking. Queen Xyler took the remote from him with one hand and, without looking, began pressing buttons in strict succession. The TV responded with lagging compliance, cycling through Nature's Most Ferocious Predators, a football game in the third quarter, and a cartoon so frenetic even Kyle couldn't have followed the plot. "You depend on primitive binary interface," the Queen said, holding the remote as if it might detonate. "Your buttons offer no neural feedback." Prince Zorg, ever the enthusiast, leaned in. "Does it transmit on local or galactic spectrum?" Tom paused, unsure if there was a correct answer. "Local," he said, "for now." The Queen set the remote down and placed her fingertips against the plastic, eyes closing as if listening for the faint whimper of a distant star. For a second, the TV went black. Then, as if commanded by some invisible signal, it blazed back to life, streaming a commercial for dish soap. The Queen's eyelids flickered. The TV responded by muting itself. "Functional," she said, "but non-optimal." Prince Zorg looked wounded on Tom's behalf. "We will demonstrate the superior method," he said, extracting from his sleeve a glittering, multifaceted crystal about the size of a sugar cube. He held it in his palm, focused and pointed at the TV. The screen flared, then began flipping through channels at a pace that bordered on seizure-inducing. Static, then cooking shows, then 5 seconds of what might have been a wildlife documentary spliced with congressional hearings. Finally, the TV settled on a program unfamiliar to the Petersons, a low-res shopping network featuring a bored-looking alien with 3 arms, hawking what appeared to be a universal binary interface enhancer. "This is our preferred source of commerce," said the Queen. Tom glanced at Sarah, who had paused mid-kitchen sweep to witness the spectacle. Is that an infomercial?" "It is a mode of transmission for critical updates," the Queen replied, "and for consumer awareness." "I think I saw that guy at Best Buy," Sarah muttered, returning to the kitchen. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sarah confronted the prospect of demonstrating the dishwasher to an audience from the future. The attendant who had earlier vacuumed glitter now regarded the appliance with the gravity of a person about to defuse a bomb. "It is a cleansing chamber?" he asked, poking at the rinse cycle with a sterile glove. "It washes our plates and cups." "Manual loading and unloading," the attendant noted. "And the controls?" She ran through the basics. Soap goes here, settings are here, hit start, walk away. The attendant watched with a level of scrutiny Sarah normally reserved for standardized tests. Then, with no warning, he produced a small, floating drone from his sleeve, the device whirring and blinking as it hovered above the countertop. Sarah watched in horror as the drone zipped to the dishwasher's control panel, emitted a pulse of violet light, and attached itself firmly to the heavy wash button. The dishwasher groaned, then rattled, then ramped up to a volume usually reserved for commercial jet engines. The lights in the kitchen dimmed. From inside the washer came a noise like a blender trying to puree bowling balls. Before Sarah could intervene, the drone beeped twice, then shot a thin laser into the seam of the door. The dishwasher released a pneumatic sigh and popped open. Inside, every dish was sparkling clean and stacked in a perfect spiral, each glass nested inside the next. But there was also a problem. Several objects that had not been present at the start, Kyle's favorite dinosaur socks, a spatula, and what might have been one of Sarah's old retainer cases, spun lazily in a small, swirling portal at the back of the machine. The attendant made a note on his tablet, looking entirely unruffled. Cleansing achieved. Also, primitive sorting algorithm improved. Sarah closed the dishwasher, staring at the spot where the socks had vanished. "I'm not sure if that's better." Just then, Tom appeared in the doorway, holding the TV remote like a broken wand. "Sarah," he whispered, "they just made our cable package obsolete." Sarah pointed at the dishwasher. "They just sent our silverware to a black hole." He considered this, then shrugged. "If it keeps the house clean, I can live with it." The attendant, observing this exchange, added another line to his notes. "Primitive earth cleaning technology. Inefficient but endearing. Upgrade advisable." Sarah eyed the dishwasher, wondering what else it would eat if given the chance. Behind her, Kindra and Kyle charged into the room, trailing blue jelly footprints. "Mom, Prince Zorg wants to see the trampoline," Kyle shouted, the prospect of lost socks already forgotten. Sarah glanced at the clock. The visit was nowhere near over, but she was beginning to see the light at the end of the diplomatic tunnel, even if it did occasionally swirl into a portal and eat your cutlery. She wiped her hands, squared her shoulders, and prepared for the next round. Chapter 10. The playroom, in theory, was neutral ground, a territory where Legos, dinosaurs, and pastel plastic cups could coexist in relative peace. In practice, it was the most volatile sector in the Peterson house, an incubator for bruised shins, diplomatic incidents, and the kind of sibling rivalry that would have kept the UN in business for decades. Kyle's scream of "Mama!" preceded his actual arrival by a solid 2 seconds. He barreled in from the hallway, hotly pursued by Kindra, who brandished his favorite spaceship overhead like a holy relic. The Queen's 3 attendants, caught mid-note on their tablets, parted to let the stampede pass. Sarah, running entirely on motherly autopilot, executed her crisis triage with the speed of a seasoned general. Kindra, give it back. Kyle, inside voice, or you lose a screen minute. But Kindra had momentum and an audience. She dodged around the Queen's chair, ducked behind the couch, and finally retreated to the foot of Prince Zorg, who offered her sanctuary with a conspiratorial wink. Kyle collapsed onto the floor in a full, red-faced tantrum, limbs thrashing as if he were trying to swim away from his own misery. The sound reached a frequency that seemed to resonate with the Queen's crystal accessories. Several pendants vibrated in sympathy. Sarah bent down to initiate her patented timeout escalation, but found her way blocked by the prince. He crouched beside Kyle, studied the situation with clinical interest, and placed 2 fingertips on either side of the boy's head. The young one's energy field is severely misaligned, Zorg said. He swept his hands in slow, looping patterns above Kyle's scalp. Each movement left a faint phosphorescent trail, a haze of blue and green light that twisted in midair before dissolving. Kyle, startled by the spectacle, stopped screaming and watched the display with awe. He blinked twice, tears drying on his cheeks. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice suddenly small. "Realigning your locus of will," said Zorg. "In our custom, emotional turbulence is hazardous to neurological development." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. It was the first time anyone had managed to short-circuit Kyle's meltdowns without bribery or threats. Across the room, Queen Xylar observed the scene with critical fascination. She had stationed herself at Kindra's tea party, where the child had assembled an array of plastic cups, dollhouse biscuits, and, centerpiece of the spread, a jar of glimmer pods still cycling through a spectrum of color. The Queen regarded the arrangement, then reached out and adjusted the placement of a teacup by exactly 3 centimeters. The vessel of refreshment must always be positioned at a 45-degree angle to the dominant appendage, she explained, her voice soft but unyielding. Kindra nodded, eyes wide. Like this? She shifted her cup and offered the Queen a fistful of imaginary sugar. Precisely, said Xylar, who then demonstrated the correct pour by miming a slow, elegant tilt of the pot. The 3 attendants hovered nearby, their eyes flicking from Kindra's progress to the prince's energy realignment. Occasionally, one would update a note or glance at Sarah, as if silently grading her on parental performance. Sarah retreated to the periphery, not sure whether to be grateful or terrified. She watched as Prince Zorg guided Kyle through a simple, rhythmic breathing exercise, each exhale punctuated by a shimmer of colored light. When Kyle's face had relaxed and his tantrum had receded to a dull memory, Zorg nodded in satisfaction. Much improved, he said, standing and offering the boy his spaceship. Kyle accepted it wordlessly, then stood and gave Kindra a look that was only slightly smug. You can play with it, he said, but only if you let me do the launch countdown. Deal, said Kindra, who promptly poured an invisible cup of tea for the Queen. Sarah blinked. Had she just witnessed her children negotiate a peace treaty? Into this domestic tableau walked Tom, a tray of snacks balanced precariously on one hand. We have cookies, he announced, trying to sound casual. And carrot sticks. And, do you guys like cookies? Prince Zorg executed an enthusiastic nod. Queen Xylar regarded the tray with the cool appraisal of a customs agent, but allowed Kindra to serve her first. Manners are important, the Queen said, eyeing Kindra's grip on the cup. But flexibility is essential for continued survival. Tom took a seat next to Sarah and whispered, I think our kids are getting a royal education. Sarah could only nod. The Queen had orchestrated Kindra's tea party into a thing of precision and order, but had also complemented Kindra's improvisational flair. Prince Zorg had tamed the wildest of Peterson tantrums without so much as a timeout. Above it all, Mittens perched on the highest bookshelf, tail twitching in slow, hypnotic beats. The cat tracked the shifting colors of Prince Zorg's energy trails, eyes huge and unblinking, clearly unsettled by the new rules of engagement. By the time the snacks had been distributed, the room had taken on a peculiar calm. Kyle and Kindra sat cross-legged, hands in their laps, awaiting the next phase of instruction. Prince Zorg, eating cookies in neat, measured bites, offered commentary on the planetary advantages of carrot sticks. Rich in root-based microflora, he observed, licking the tip of his finger to catch a stray crumb. One of the attendants quietly filmed the proceedings, the other two jotting down observations about youth malleability and adaptive etiquette in Terran family structures. Sarah, suddenly self-conscious, straightened her shirt and tried to remember if she'd vacuumed the playroom rug. Then, in a moment both absurd and touching, Kindra poured a new cup of tea and, without prompting, offered it first to the Queen, then to Kyle, then to Sarah. She finished by lifting her own cup and saying, "Cheers, everybody." The Queen mimicked the gesture, lifting her cup with a gravity that transformed plastic into something regal. The others followed suit, and for a heartbeat, the room was united in silent, ridiculous ceremony. Even Mittens, sensing the shift in the air, leapt down from the bookshelf and landed almost gracefully at Sarah's feet. The cat rubbed against her ankle, purring a sound that, if Sarah hadn't known better, might have been approval. Tom smiled, genuinely this time, and clinked his carrot stick against Kindra's cup. "To new friends," he said. The Queen inclined her head. "To adaptability." Prince Zorg, mouthful of cookie, raised his glass. "And to improved energy fields." The tension of the past 48 hours sloughed off like old paint, leaving only exhaustion and a wild, improbable sense of pride. She looked around the room, at her kids, at the royal family, at the living evidence that different didn't mean impossible. She caught Tom's eye, and he winked. From across the room, Kindra beamed, marshalling the royal tea party with unshakable 5-year-old authority. And in the gleam of the Queen's crystalline cup, Sarah saw, briefly, beautifully, a future in which intergalactic harmony was possible, so long as everyone agreed on snack breaks and timeouts. The royal attendants noted the moment with a flourish. Subject offspring, adaptive, they wrote, and unexpectedly diplomatic. Sarah couldn't have put it better herself. Chapter 11. By noon, Tom had elevated the backyard barbecue from simple lunch to planetary summit. He approached the grill like a general plotting troop movements, squinting into the May sun and performing a slow, contemplative rub of the tongs every 30 seconds, as if the stainless steel might unlock the secrets of peaceful coexistence. Sarah watched him from the kitchen window as she lined up condiment bottles on a tray. Ketchup, mustard, relish, something called artisanal aioli, that was basically mayo with delusions of grandeur. She arranged the squeeze bottles in perfect rainbow order, as if good color theory could balance out the existential threat currently lurking on her patio. Behind her, Kindra clomped across the tile floor in unicorn slippers, dragging an oversized jar of pickles with the grim determination of a peasant hauling tribute to an overlord. "Mom, these pickles are heavy," she complained, and Sarah offered a tight-lipped smile, resisting the urge to scream. "You're strong," Sarah said, and nudged the girl gently toward the sliding glass door. "Set them next to the chips, and don't let Petie get the lid off this time." The pit bull in question was already outside, watching Tom with the rapt adoration of a football fan before kickoff. Whenever Tom gave the tongs a click, Petie's ears twitched. When Tom shook out a bag of charcoal, Petie whimpered, pawing at the patio until his nails left permanent hieroglyphs in the concrete. "Mom," Kyle poked his head into the kitchen, eyes huge. "Are we allowed to eat with the Queen?" Sarah's brain stuttered. "I don't see why not. Just remember your manners." Kyle nodded, then added, "Prince Zorg says on his planet they eat all meals in a state of gravitational neutrality. Can we do that?" "I don't think our chairs float, honey," Sarah said, but the thought of the royal family bobbing in midair over the picnic table made her almost laugh. Almost. She set out paper plates with NASA logos, because irony was all she had left, and checked her phone for the 5th time in as many minutes. No new messages from Tom's boss, no new edicts from the Cosmic Protocol Manual, just a growing string of text bubbles from the neighborhood group chat, all variations on "Do you see what's parked on the Peterson lawn?" and "Should we alert the authorities?" and "Anyone else smell burning plastic?" Sarah took a breath and stepped outside. The Xylosians had staked out a spot on the far edge of the patio, where they stood in a perfect isosceles triangle. The queen in front, arms folded and expression glacial. Prince Zorg at her right, watching Tom's every movement with anthropological fascination. And the third, the major domo, who balanced an obsidian tablet and periodically tapped the screen with a stylus that seemed to project invisible, scrolling data into thin air. None of them touched the chairs Sarah had brought out. They just hovered, literally, an inch above the flagstones, the shifting sunlight giving their skin a pulsing, nacreous sheen. Tom, as if sensing the mounting scrutiny, went into overdrive. He squirted lighter fluid onto the coals in a continuous, arcing stream, then snapped the igniter with a little too much gusto. A fireball whooshed up, sending a puff of smoke directly into the face of the queen, who took a half step back and blinked. "Apologies!" Tom called, waving the tongs in what he must have hoped was a gesture of reassurance. "Just, prepping the environment." The queen's voice was a glacial monotone. "The emission of particulate matter is not mandated by your species' sustenance rituals." "It's tradition," Sarah interjected, setting the condiment tray on the table and wiping her hands on her jeans. "It wouldn't be a cookout without some smoke." The major domo consulted his tablet. "Smoke," he repeated, as if the word itself was a disease. Sarah offered a tight smile, then busied herself with setting out the plates, napkins, and pickles. Kindra hovered at her elbow, sniffling. "Do you think the queen likes pickles?" "I think she's more of a coleslaw person," Sarah said, hoping the distraction would keep Kindra from launching a briny spear at their honored guests. The neighbors had begun to gather at the chain-link fence, a silent, growing audience of lawn-mowing dads and athleisure-clad moms. Across the street, the HOA president clutched a clipboard so tightly her knuckles gleamed like magnesium flares. Sarah felt a spike of dread. It was one thing to host a royal visit. It was quite another to host it under the relentless, unblinking gaze of a suburban tribunal. She tried to ignore them as Tom lowered the first row of hot dogs onto the grill. The sizzle was thunderous, followed by a second, higher-pitched squeal as fat dripped onto the coals and vaporized on contact. The queen and her entourage recoiled in unison, their skin suddenly flickering with rapid, distress signal flashes. "Is that an emergency?" Sarah whispered, sidling up to Tom. He shrugged, eyes wide. "Manual said nothing about hot dogs." On the grill, the lynx writhed and popped, a choreography of dying animals that, in retrospect, probably sent the wrong message to any species with a strict no-carnivore policy. As Tom attempted a mid-air flip, Prince Zorg's monitoring orb went ballistic, whirring up from his shoulder and emitting a blue cone of light that enveloped the entire barbecue. The orb vibrated, then let out a sound exactly like a referee's whistle at the moment of an egregious foul. "Flammable offerings are strictly forbidden by Intergalactic Code 7.3, Queen Xylos intoned, her voice suddenly several decibels louder than before. She drew herself up to her full height, which was almost intimidating when the heels and the gravity-defying gown came into play. "Cease this dangerous display." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Tom, panicked, reached for the etiquette manual and started thumbing through pages with the speed and desperation of a man searching for a parachute in a falling elevator. It just says, "All host rituals must conform to guest standards unless a cultural imperative is explicitly invoked." Is grilling a cultural imperative? "I'd call it more of a national compulsion," Sarah muttered, but the queen's glare brooked no sarcasm. Prince Zorg looked near tears. "The emissions will corrode my resonance membranes. I require isolation." The major domo produced a sphere from the folds of his robe and, with a flick of his wrist, created a shimmering, translucent barrier around the royal party. It looked like a soap bubble, but the air inside immediately became tinted blue, as if compensating for the ambient trauma. Petie, sensing that something had gone badly off script, launched himself at the table, barking in frantic counterpoint to the queen's indignation. His paws skidded through the relish, scattering it in a green, viscous trail that landed squarely at the queen's feet. Mittens, who had been watching from the fence, chose that moment to leap onto the table, sending napkins, plates, and, yes, the jar of pickles tumbling in all directions. Kindra screamed, partly out of fear, partly in admiration. The HOA president, smelling blood in the water, and perhaps also the burning hot dogs, charged across the lawn and brandished her clipboard like a sword. "I'll have you know, open flames are not permitted within 10 feet of any perimeter structure, as stated in the Greenvale Circle Covenant," she barked, face flushed with power. Sarah snapped. "We're trying to conduct intergalactic diplomacy here, Janet." Janet ignored her, eyes locked on the queen's entourage. If your guests are bothered by particulate emissions, they may file a formal complaint with the board. She handed a pre-filled form to the major domo, who took it as if handling a live grenade. Tom, now completely unmoored from reality, attempted to salvage the moment by squirting ketchup onto the hot dogs in a series of cheerful looping arcs. The ketchup, perhaps emboldened by the heat, sizzled and vaporized in an acrid plume, which the queen interpreted as an act of chemical warfare. "Are you simulating blood sacrifice?" she demanded, voice now icy enough to freeze a Superfund site. Tom nearly dropped the bottle. "It's just ketchup, tomato, totally plant-based. Processed with high fructose corn syrup and stabilizers," the major domo read from his tablet, face ashen. A silence settled over the yard, broken only by the soft weeping of Prince Zorg as he cradled his monitoring orb and the gentle thud of Kindra's pickle jar rolling to a stop against the fence. Petie, in his element, leapt onto the smoldering grill and promptly singed his fur, adding the scent of burning dog hair to the miasma. He bounded away, yelping, and knocked over a lawn chair, which collided with one of the Xylosian tripods. The tripod, unmoored, fired a burst of holographic light into the sky, briefly spelling out protocol breach in 12 languages. Kyle, who had been pretending to be invisible, seized the moment to grab one of the alien monitoring orbs and sprinted a victory lap around the yard, followed by Mittens, who believed she had finally found a worthy prey item. Sarah, surrounded by shrapnel, chaos, and the remnants of her dignity, tried to salvage what she could. "Queen Xylar, I assure you, no harm was meant. This is just how we do things here." She glanced at Tom, who had given up on the etiquette manual and was now shoveling charred hot dogs into the trash with the blank resignation of a defeated Little League coach. Xylar regarded her with a look that combined pity, horror, and the faintest glimmer of cosmic amusement. "Your rituals are vivid." "We can order pizza," Sarah offered. "No flames, no emissions, just carbohydrates and cheese." The queen considered this, then nodded once. "Acceptable. The cheese is processed?" "Extremely." A flicker of tension vanished from her posture. "Then let us proceed with your alternative hospitality. My entourage will decontaminate the area." The major domo deployed a fleet of miniature drones, which swarmed the patio, collecting debris, smoke, and every visible trace of conflict. Within minutes, the yard was spotless, save for the blackened grill and the trail of blue jelly Petie had left in his wake. Sarah turned to Tom, who was still clutching a ketchup bottle like a life preserver. "I'll call for delivery." He nodded, dazed. "Make it 2 larges. Extra cheese." Sarah found her phone, dialed, and exhaled. The neighbors, denied the spectacle of planetary collapse, drifted back to their homes. The HOA president lingered at the fence, disappointed but determined to record every violation for posterity. The Xylosians retreated to the far corner of the yard, orbs and tablets whirring as they reconstructed their sense of order. Prince Zorg, recovered, watched Kyle and Mittens chase the rogue orb with what Sarah could only hope was the Xylosian equivalent of a smile. Kindra plopped onto the grass next to Sarah. "Did we win?" she whispered. Sarah ruffled her hair. "Nobody got vaporized. I'd say we broke even." The pizza arrived in record time. The queen accepted her slice with regal dignity, then picked off the pepperoni and lined them up in a neat geometric array before taking a single thoughtful bite. Sarah watched, exhausted, as her family and their guests found a new cheese-based equilibrium. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time all day, it didn't have to be. Chapter 12. By 9, the Peterson house had achieved a temporary ceasefire. The aliens were parked in the living room, methodically debriefing themselves on the day's cultural atrocities, while Sarah hustled her kids through the bath and bed circuit with a speed she usually reserved for tornado warnings. She could hear Tom stalling for time in the kitchen, something about showing the queen their herb garden, which in reality was a single wilted basil plant, and a rosemary bush that had survived 3 attempts at murder by neglect. Sarah didn't care. All she wanted was 10 minutes of peace before the next round of protocol. Upstairs, Kyle and Kindra jostled for sink space, each with a toothbrush gripped like a weapon. Sarah moved between them, dispensing toothpaste with industrial efficiency. "You're getting it all over the mirror," she hissed as Kyle spit a blue froth that splattered in a perfect arc. "It's for science," he said, running his tongue over his teeth. "Prince Zorg says oral bacteria is the primary vector for disease in primitive mammals." "Then you'd better brush twice," Sarah said, counting to 3 before she remembered to laugh. Kindra finished first and scampered to her room, already clutching her favorite unicorn. By the time Sarah followed, Kindra had arranged her army of plush animals into defensive formation around her pillow, as if preparing for a siege. Sarah helped her into pajamas, a faded set covered in constellations and slightly singed at the cuff from the great microwave s'mores debacle of last fall. Tonight, you're going to sleep like a star explorer, she promised, tucking the covers under Kindra's chin. Kindra considered this, then whispered, "Will the Queen be mad if we dream about aliens?" "She'll probably be flattered," Sarah said, stroking her hair. From the hallway, a soft, stately cough. "May we observe this ritual?" Sarah jumped, nearly impaling herself on a rogue plastic tiara. The Queen and Prince Zorg stood at the threshold, accompanied by the ever-present Major Domo, who was already inputting data into his tablet. "You want to watch bedtime?" Sarah asked. Queen Xylos stepped forward, face illuminated by the gentle blue glow of her resonance jewelry. The manual alludes to a period of neural inactivity following nocturnal nourishment. We seek to verify. Kyle, who had been lurking in the doorway, perked up. "They want to watch us sleep?" "It is not uncommon in field studies," the major domo intoned, as if sleepovers were a recognized form of espionage. Sarah bit her lip, wondering how this would play on the next parent-teacher night. "Well, we have a few steps before actual sleep. Story, goodnight song, tucking in." "Demonstrate," the Queen said. Sarah, nerves raw, grabbed the closest book, an illustrated collection of animal fables, and plopped onto the edge of Kindra's bed. Kyle slithered in next to his sister, their feet dueling for turf under the blanket. She read aloud, voice tight. "Once upon a time, in the vastness of the jungle, the lion learned to share with the mouse." Queen Xylos interrupted. "Are these events factual?" "Not exactly. It's a metaphor for, getting along." The Queen made a note. "Deception before unconsciousness. Curious." Sarah pressed on, wishing the book were shorter, or better, or written for an audience not currently dissecting her parenting like a frog in a biology lab. Prince Zorg, meanwhile, was fixated on the children's pajamas. "Are these garments ceremonial, or do they serve a defensive function?" "They keep you warm," Kyle offered, twisting the sleeve of his shirt for emphasis. "Would you permit a sample?" Zorg asked. Sarah, beyond the point of protest, let him examine a spare pair from Kindra's dresser. He held the tiny pants up to the light, scrutinized the label, and ran a scanner over the fabric, which pinged with faintly disapproving chirps. "Polyester blend. Interesting," said Zorg. "Is it poisonous?" Kindra asked. "No, but it will be in 500 years," said Kyle. Sarah snapped the book shut. The story's over. Time for teeth brushing and bed. She tried to herd them down the hallway, but the Queen lingered by Kindra's bed, running her fingers along the line of plush animals. "They guard against nocturnal predators?" Xylar asked. "Sometimes," Sarah said, surprised at the shiver the question sent up her spine. Down the hall, Kyle staged a rebellion. "On Zorg's planet, they don't even sleep," he whined, launching himself onto his mattress and bouncing until Sarah threatened to remove his entire collection of foam darts. Queen Xylar glided into Kyle's room, Prince Zorg and the major domo close behind. "This is true," the Queen said. "Our species requires no unconscious restoration period. We have evolved beyond it." Kyle stared. "But don't you ever get tired?" "We enter cycles of passive observation. Our bodies rest, but our minds do not darken." "That sounds boring," said Kindra, who had materialized at Sarah's elbow, unicorn in tow. Queen Xylar shrugged, an elegant, almost human gesture. "It is efficient. Sleep is a dangerous vulnerability." Sarah felt her patience draining, the reservoir dry and cracked. "We don't have a choice. If we don't sleep, we go insane. Or worse." The Queen exchanged a look with the major domo. "Why would you voluntarily enter a death-like state?" "It's not death," Sarah barked louder than she intended. She caught herself, tried to slow her breathing. "We need sleep. We can't just stay awake forever. That's not how we're built." Silence, thick and suffocating. Kyle flopped onto his pillow, staring at the ceiling. Kindra retreated to the fortress of stuffed animals, burrowing until only her eyes showed. Sarah stared down the Queen, refusing to cry, refusing to give these intergalactic anthropologists the satisfaction of seeing her come apart. "Maybe it's not perfect, but it works for us." Xylar regarded her with an inscrutable expression, then drifted to Kindra's bedside. She knelt, a motion so unexpected that even the major domo fumbled his stylus, and reached into the folds of her robe. From her palm, she produced a sphere the size of a marble, luminous and softly humming. She held it out to Kindra. On Xylos, we also fear the unknown. This light keeps away the darkness. Kindra accepted the orb, eyes huge, and clutched it to her chest like treasure. Thank you, she whispered. Prince Zorg, not to be outdone, rummaged in his satchel and produced a tangle of glowing sticks, the kind you bought at the dollar store, but infinitely more advanced. He cracked them, shook them, and scattered them across Kyle's bed. Within moments, the room glowed with a constellation of soft colors twinkling off the ceiling and pooling in the corners. Kyle's awe was immediate. It's like stars, he breathed. An approximation, said Prince Zorg, but accurate to within 2 nanolight units. Kyle scrambled under the covers, gaze fixed on the shifting patterns above. The next moment where she'd be required to explain her species' humiliating weaknesses. Instead, the queen nodded, once, and rose to her feet. You are adequate caretakers, she said. Sarah almost laughed. I'll put that on my resume. She shut off the light, left the door open a crack, and walked the aliens back downstairs, her body heavy and her mind humming with exhaustion. At the bottom of the stairs, Tom was waiting. He took one look at Sarah's face and handed her a glass of wine, no questions asked. Did you survive? He asked. Barely, she said, sinking into the sofa. Next time, you're on bedtime duty. He grinned. If there is a next time. From upstairs, the faintest echoes of Kindra's giggle drifted down, a sound Sarah clung to as evidence that she hadn't, in fact, ruined everything. Outside, the Xylosians regrouped under their ship's shadow, their blue skin glowing faintly in the dusk. Sarah watched through the window, wineglass cool in her hand, and wondered what they dreamed about, if anything. Probably not about monsters, but maybe she thought about stars. Chapter 13. By morning, the Peterson house had completed its transformation from suburban chaos zone to intergalactic embassy. The living room was unrecognizable, every stick of furniture realigned to satisfy the sacred geometry of Xylosian etiquette, the sofa and coffee table forming a perfect right angle to the fireplace, all rugs banished to the hallway. Tripods and orbs from the royal entourage bristled from every flat surface, glowing with soft hues that changed according to a logic Sarah neither understood nor dared to question. She had not slept. Instead, she moved through the dawn hours in a fugue of cleaning, organizing, and prepping her family for what the etiquette manual described as the formal convergence of treaties and kin. At 9:02 a.m., the Queen swept into the living room with a retinue of 6. Tom followed, his shirt actually ironed for once, and the kids trailed after in mismatched socks and slightly crunchy hair from last night's glow stick extravaganza. Petie wore a cape fashioned from the good dish towel, and Mittens was nowhere to be found, presumably in exile until the diplomats vacated the premises. The Queen surveyed the room with surgical precision, then turned to Sarah. Are you prepared for the convergence ceremony? Sarah glanced at Tom, then at the circle of chairs they'd arranged exactly as instructed. As ready as we'll ever be. Prince Zorg carried a floating orb the size of a beach ball, which projected a 3-dimensional map of the solar system, all the planets orbiting in miniature. The effect was both mesmerizing and intimidating. At any moment, the entire room could be vaporized, or perhaps just downgraded to a cosmic timeshare in the outer asteroid belt. The royal major domo stood by the window, monitoring the proceedings on his obsidian tablet. Every 30 seconds, he muttered an update into his collar. Hosts have not violated spatial harmony in 7.2 minutes. Morale stable. Orb projection within parameters. Sarah wished she could report similar numbers for her blood pressure. The Queen raised both hands. Today we establish a bond between your family and the people of Xylos. The ritual is simple. Align your hearts, express intent, and sign the concordance. Any deviation will be documented for future study. Sounds easy enough, Tom said, forcing a smile that looked like it had been stapled to his face. The Queen regarded him with what might have been pity. We begin with the alignment. She stepped to the center of the room and gestured for the Petersons to join her. The major domo activated a ring of miniature drones, which hovered at chest height and projected a faintly humming energy field. The air shimmered. The neighbors watched from their windows, phones pressed to the glass. Now, Xylar intoned, we perform the harmony dance. Tom blanched. Wait, dance? Sarah, running on adrenaline and mortification, squared her shoulders. We'll follow your lead. The queen moved with the stately grace of a flag in a slow breeze, arms out, fingers splayed, palms up, then sweeping in arcs that left trails of glittering afterimage. The choreography was intricate, but not impossible, a sequence of steps and turns that suggested orbit, gravity, the eternal patience of planetary motion. Sarah did her best to mirror the queen's movements. Tom stumbled at first, stepped on her foot, then found his rhythm by counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Prince Zorg encouraged the kids to join. Kyle, desperate for approval, launched into the routine with athletic abandon, while Kindra giggled and twirled, arms helicoptering in happy chaos. Even Petie, sensing an opportunity, circled the queen and wagged his tail in perfect time to the music pulsing from the tripods. For a moment, Sarah forgot the neighbors, the intergalactic stakes, and her own exhaustion. She let herself move, let the colors of the energy field blend with the laughter of her children and the serious, focused gaze of Queen Xylar. The harmony dance ended with a synchronized bow, all hands and paws touching the carpet. The queen straightened and addressed the group. You have honored our tradition. The concordance may proceed. She beckoned to the major domo, who produced a scroll of shimmering material and unrolled it in midair. The treaty hovered, words shifting and refracting with every angle, the text equal parts English, Xylosian glyph, and what looked like binary code. Each participant must place their mark, the queen said, and offer a phrase of intent. Tom signed first, gripping the ceremonial pen with fingers that shook only a little. I promise to try not to burn anything else, he said, the joke landing a little flat, but not fatally so. Sarah signed next, using her best school teacher cursive. We promise to welcome you as family and as guests, she said, aware that it sounded corny, but meaning it anyway. Kyle took the pen and, after a moment's hesitation, scrawled Earth rules in a jagged, triumphant script. Kindra drew a careful heart, then whispered, Don't be scared of the dark, before handing the pen back. Petie was next. The queen dabbed his paw in a gel and pressed it to the scroll. The print was perfect, a badge of honor in lime green. Prince Zorg signed with a flourish, then leaned in and whispered, I promise to protect the secrets of your pajamas. Queen Xylar added her signature last, an elegant looping flourish that seemed to ripple through the document and stabilize the shifting text. Is there an official seal? Tom asked, now visibly more relaxed. There is, the queen replied, and pressed her palm to the scroll. Instantly, it solidified, the words freezing in place, the color shifting from silver to a warm, golden hue. The tripods pulsed in time with the new signature, and a soft chime filled the air. We are bound, said the queen. It was done. For a second, no one knew what to do. Sarah looked at Tom looked at the queen, and the kids exchanged high fives as if they'd just won the Super Bowl. Then, a hot dog, charred from yesterday's cookout and overlooked in the cleanup, rolled across the carpet and stopped at the queen's feet. There was a moment of silent dread, every being in the room contemplating the potential for disaster. Queen Xylar bent down, picked up the hot dog, and inspected it with the gravity of a judge reviewing evidence. She turned to Sarah. Is this an artifact of importance? It's, just lunch, Prince Zorg grinned. A symbol of our shared cultural understanding. The queen nodded, and, in an act that would have made any mother proud, offered the hot dog to Petie, who devoured it in a single triumphant bite. Sarah exhaled. The neighbors, watching through the window, burst into spontaneous applause. Queen Xylar gathered her retinue and moved to the door. We will return for the second phase of integration. Until then, preserve your rituals and your hot dogs. We will, Sarah promised. With a final, regal nod, the queen departed, her train and tripods trailing behind like the tail of a comet. The house was quiet. Tom collapsed onto the couch, Petie at his side. The kids ran outside to tell the story to anyone who would listen. Sarah sat on the coffee table and watched the golden scroll shimmer in the light, proof that the universe was, at its core, a place where anything could happen. She reached for Tom's hand and squeezed. Think we'll make it to phase 2? He asked. With this crew? We'll make it to the stars. Outside, the world turned on, the day unfolding as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But in the Peterson house, history had been made, and the smell of burned hot dogs lingered, if not forever, at least until the next diplomatic barbecue. Chapter 14. Sarah watched from the kitchen window, thumb denting a soft spot in a bruised apple as the Xylosian retinue packed for departure. The royal party had colonized the backyard patio with military efficiency. Hover drones zipped from the picnic table to the ship's open hatch, each bearing loads that shimmered in and out of the visible spectrum. The Queen's personal effects, gowns of what looked like frozen lighting, complex tripods topped with gleaming orbs, were folded and compressed into suitcases that, upon closing, shrank by half and hissed out a plume of floral-scented vapor. Kindra stood on a kitchen chair for maximum view, her small hands pressed so firmly to the glass that Sarah could see the faint starbursts of stickiness left behind. "Are they taking all the pillows?" Kindra asked, watching a pair of attendants roll up the anti-gravity cushions into what looked like oversized sushi rolls and slot them into a mesh pod. "Probably just borrowing," Sarah said, though she doubted she'd ever see her best guest towels again. "They need them for the trip home." On the other side of the window, Prince Zorg jogged around the base of the silver craft, scanning the lawn for stray algae jars. Each time he found one, he made a brisk clicking sound and snapped it shut, then tossed it over his shoulder to an attendant who caught it with a gravity-defying, over-the-head grab. At one point, Zorg spotted the kids at the window and offered a two-handed salute, his grin so wide and earnest that it read as deeply uncool to anyone over the age of 9. Kyle returned the salute, then pressed his mouth to the glass, amplifying his next comment. "Mom, they left a bunch of the Jello stuff on the swing set. Is it going to, mutate or anything?" Sarah peered out at the blue-violet splatters that ringed the base of the slide. "If it does, maybe it'll eat the dandelions." From the living room, Tom called out, "They've got a drone stuck in the power lines again." Sarah set the apple down, squinting. Above the garage, one of the glittering beetle-shaped drones hovered at odd angles, antennae flailing in the breeze. An attendant, dressed per protocol in a perfectly crisp white jumpsuit, stood below, shaking his fist and barking instructions at the drone as if volume might influence voltage. Sarah watched as Queen Xylar herself glided across the grass, every movement rippling through the shifting patterns of her gown. The Queen paused at the edge of the garden, looking up at the drone with a mixture of scientific curiosity and royal exasperation. With a flick of her wrist, she produced a baton that telescoped out of her sleeve. She pointed it at the drone, pressed a button, and the device immediately stopped twitching and descended neatly into her waiting hand. The Queen cradled the drone as if it were a misbehaving child, then turned and addressed the attendant with a series of crisp musical syllables. The attendant bowed, took the drone, and retreated toward the ship with double-time steps. Sarah wondered if Xylar ever lost her cool, even when faced with electromagnetic disaster or the catastrophic mixing of species-appropriate tableware. She suspected not. Out on the deck, the repulsor pads of the ship had already carved 4 perfect circles into the sod. The grass in each ring had gone from vibrant green to a glassy pale gold. The HOA president, who after yesterday's barbecue debacle now watched every event from her living room with the solemnity of a Vatican envoy, had set up a tripod-mounted GoPro to capture evidence for posterity, or at least for the next board meeting. Sarah pretended not to notice the camera and instead focused on the way the ship's metallic surface rippled as it absorbed the last of the cargo. "Should we go out?" Tom asked, appearing beside her, his hair hastily gelled and his shirt tucked with a desperation that suggested he'd already spilled something on it once and was hoping nobody would notice. Sarah considered. There was no chapter in the etiquette manual for how to say goodbye to alien royalty after a multi-day sleepover. The best she could muster was a faint memory of dropping college roommates at the airport and a vague sense that, at minimum, one should walk them to the curb. She nodded. "We should." They wrangled the children into shoes and jackets, an unnecessary precaution for the 60-degree morning, but armor felt appropriate. The back door stuck, as always, and Sarah shouldered it open with a grunt. The early sun made the alien ship sparkle. For a moment, she wondered if the neighbors across the street had even slept. Queen Xylar awaited at the foot of the ramp, her retinue arrayed in a precise V behind her. Prince Zorg bounced from foot to foot at her side, his sash freshly laundered and his hair slicked flat against his skull. Tom initiated the proceedings with a diplomatic wave. "Morning! You all packed?" Xylar's mouth curved upward by a nanometer. "Preparations are complete. We await final protocol." Sarah stepped forward, aware of her family lined up awkwardly behind her. "It was an honor having you here," she said, and meant it, even though her left eye still twitched from the memory of the cleaning drone devouring her best dish towel. "Is there anything else you need before takeoff?" Xyler shook her head, the light refracting from her cheekbones like the shimmer off a soap bubble. Your hospitality exceeded requirement. The treaty is affirmed. Zorg bounced up to Kyle and Kindra, producing from his sleeve a pair of small, glossy cubes. Token for your participation, he said, pressing a cube into each palm. Kyle's lit up instantly, spinning a miniature hologram of the Xylosian ship. Kindra's pulsed in pink, then unfolded into a floating, animated unicorn. A memory pod, Zorg explained, for future study. Kindra clutched the unicorn, eyes wide. Does it do magic? Zorg considered. It responds to kindness. Kindra nodded solemnly. Me too. An attendant approached, producing a clipboard and an actual pen for Tom's signature. Tom hesitated, then scrawled his name in block letters. The attendant examined the form, made a minor adjustment with a silver stylus, and filed it away into a case that, when zipped shut, audibly beeped and then appeared to melt into the attendant's sleeve. Sarah fought the urge to giggle. She glanced up to see Queen Xyler's eyes fixed on her, as if the queen had noticed the almost laugh and was curious whether it would escape. Behind them, the hatch of the ship began to close, the ramp retracting with the slow, steady movement of an escalator in a shopping mall after closing time. The drone zipped up and vanished inside. The seating orbs and sushi-rolled pillows were stacked neatly inside the glowing vestibule. Sarah realized there was a moment left for something, a gesture, a word, maybe a photo op. She reached out her hand, then remembered last night's handshake incident, and quickly substituted a polite bow. The queen mirrored her, hands folded at the waist, and Sarah felt absurdly proud. Tom, undeterred by past embarrassment, offered his hand to Prince Zorg, who accepted it with both of his. This time, instead of a stilted shake, Zorg clasped Tom's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. A crackle of static electricity snapped between them, and Tom yelped, more in surprise than pain. Sorry, Zorg said, but grinned wider. The queen stepped up onto the ramp, her attendants falling in behind her with perfect timing. At the threshold, she turned one last time and addressed the Petersons. We will remember your variants. The Sarah nodded, feeling the phrase settle into her memory, more meaningful than she'd expected. She watched as the party ascended and the hatch sealed, its surface shifting from mirror to opaque. The engines wound up with a high, crystalline whine. Sarah put her hands over Kindra's ears, but the girl wriggled free, intent on the ship. The repulsor pads glowed, humming the air into visible rings that trembled the branches of the backyard sycamore. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden, gentle lurch, the ship lifted. The air shimmered. The GoPro on the neighbor's tripod fell over, defeated by the backwash of the ascent. The ship hovered above the lawn for a heartbeat, then shot upward, trailing a faint scent of oranges and hot metal. On the grass below, 4 perfect circles of scorched lawn smoked in the cool morning air. Sarah stood with her family, the silence thick as pudding, all 4 of them staring up at the sky until the ship became nothing but a flicker in the blue. After a moment, Tom said, Well, that happened. Kyle clutched his hologram cube and announced, I'm taking this for show and tell. Kindra turned to Sarah, hugging the floating unicorn pod to her chest. Mom, do you think they'll visit again? Sarah considered the ruined grass, the aftermath of the week, and the strange, sweet ache she felt at the sight of the empty sky. I hope so, she said, and she meant it. Chapter 15. The house was quieter than Sarah remembered, so quiet that the air itself seemed to breathe, like the whole structure was finally able to exhale after holding tension for a week. She stepped through the living room and surveyed the damage, cataloging every artifact of the royal visit. The ceiling fan sagged at a new, impossible angle, its blades gently oscillating up and down with the slow confidence of a wounded bird. At some point during the harmony dance, a hover drone had misfired and slammed into the motor housing, leaving a crescent-shaped dent and a spiderweb of cracks across the light fixture. Now, every time the air conditioning kicked on, the fan let out a faint metallic whine that made Sarah's molars hum. The carpet, once off-white, was now an irregular patchwork of blue, green, and indigo splotches. The pulsating nectar had made several unplanned landings during state dinners, and the resulting stains refused to yield to even the most aggressive of household solvents. Sarah considered calling in a professional, then wondered if there was a number for alien upholstery emergencies. Petie had already claimed the largest blue patch as his personal nap zone. The dog lay on his back, paws in the air, snoring with contentment. Each breath wafted the faint aroma of rotisserie chicken and whatever fermented compound the Xylosians used to flavor their royal delicacies. On the windowsill, a lone piece of bubble wrap shimmered in the sunlight. Sarah picked it up. It was heavier than expected with a faintly iridescent sheen. When she squeezed, it didn't pop so much as sizzle, releasing a soft, floral-scented vapor that made her eyes sting with nostalgia. She wandered into the kitchen, expecting Tom and finding him half submerged under the sink. He reemerged, victorious, holding the detached spray nozzle aloft. They turned our garbage disposal into a smoothie blender, he said, running his thumb along the rim. It makes a noise now, like a dolphin choking on a harmonica. Sarah set the bubble wrap down and eyed the sink. Do we keep it? He considered. Might come in handy. We can charge for performance art. She grinned, and for a second, the exhaustion melted away. Tom straightened and looked at the warping in the kitchen ceiling, where a faint charred outline of a drone's flight path circled like a fossilized bird. At least the house didn't explode, he said. Sarah scanned the kitchen. Even in chaos, there was something reassuring about seeing their own mugs in the dish rack, the pile of unread mail by the fridge, the stubborn stain from the great grape juice incident of 2021 still visible under the island. It was a mess, but it was theirs. She walked back to the living room, trailed by Tom, and let herself collapse against the doorframe. Well, he said, at least the house is still standing. Sarah let her head fall back, staring up at the wounded ceiling fan as it creaked into motion. Barely, she said, her voice rough but alive with relief. They stood there, letting the silence fill up the room, and Sarah found herself wishing, for just a moment, that Queen Xylar could see them now. Not as hosts, not as diplomats, but just as a pair of humans, tired, battered, and proud survivors of their own small slice of history. The ceiling fan hummed on, indifferent to treaties and protocol, casting slow-moving shadows across the blue-stained carpet. And for the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to do nothing at all. Chapter 16. The next morning, Sarah padded into the kitchen to find a new arrival waiting on the floor. A glossy, oblong device the size and shape of a modest bread loaf, with rounded edges and a shell that shimmered through half a dozen metallic hues depending on the angle of the light. For a split second, Sarah thought it was another piece of luggage the Xylosians had forgotten. She nudged it gently with her toe. The device responded with a quiet hiss and popped open a horizontal seam, revealing a single blue eye that glowed to life and then blinked as if in greeting. Sarah stepped back. The device lifted off, hovered 2 inches above the tile, and emitted a soft, ultrasonic ping. A ring of sensor lights ignited around its circumference, then began to rotate faster and faster until they blurred into a pale, ghostly halo. The breadloaf robot executed a perfect 360, scanning the room with a beam of green light that flicked over countertops, appliances, and Sarah herself. Satisfied, it zipped to the nearest spill, yesterday's cereal milk congealing under the breakfast bar, and promptly engulfed it with a gentle slurping sound. Sarah stared, then called out, "Tom, you need to see this." He appeared within seconds, running a hand through his hair and blinking sleep from his eyes. "Please don't say the disposal's backed up again." She pointed. The robot had already made a lap around the kitchen, lapping up sticky spots, collecting dog hair, and scrubbing at the baseboards with a tiny telescoping brush that shot out from the undercarriage. It approached a particularly stubborn blob of blue jelly, paused for a microsecond, then emitted a thin stream of purple foam. The foam sizzled, lifted the stain like a magician's trick, and vanished it entirely. Tom's eyebrows shot upward. "Is that ours?" The device, apparently pleased with its progress, zoomed out of the kitchen and into the living room. Petie, fresh from his nap, leapt to attention and gave chase, barking in wild delight. The robot navigated under the couch, zipped between chair legs, and even managed to swerve around a teetering stack of Kindra's art supplies without toppling a single crayon. At one point, the device and the dog squared off in the foyer. Petie adopted a playbow, tail wagging so furiously it dusted the walls, and waited. The robot flashed its blue eye, advanced a few inches, then retreated with a chirp, baiting Petie into lunging. They circled each other, neither gaining ground, until the robot fired a quick puff of air at the dog's nose and zipped away, leaving Petie snorting and sneezing in happy confusion. Sarah watched, entranced, as the robot darted up onto the wall, adhering to the surface with a faint suction. It zipped across the paint in a perfect grid, scanning for dirt or dust, then vacuumed up several weeks' worth of neglect in under a minute. On the ceiling, it paused to buff out a smoke stain left over from Tom's failed flambe experiment, then executed a crisp somersault and landed neatly back on the floor. Even Mittens, who had until now regarded all technology as beneath him, crept down from the bookshelf to observe the interloper. The cat kept a dignified distance, but his pupils dilated into wide, black saucers as the robot completed its circuit of the downstairs. When the robot made a beeline for the litter box, Mittens stiffened, but the device merely hovered at the edge, executed a low-frequency hum, and delicately vacuumed up stray grains of litter before rolling away. Sarah and Tom followed the robot as it finished its first loop and returned to the kitchen, where it parked itself in the center of the tile and projected a small, holographic display onto the cabinet door. The symbols were Xylosian, beautiful loopy script that reminded Sarah of musical notation, but the image quickly morphed into English. "Greetings, honored hosts," it read. "This unit is a diplomatic sanitation companion, DSC 2.1. It is programmed to maintain environmental hygiene and support local customs of cleanliness. For questions, activate the holo manual." A smaller text flickered at the bottom. "Maintenance is fully automated. Do not attempt to feed." Tom let out a low whistle. Why couldn't they have left one of these for the school? Sarah touched the glowing blue eye, half expecting it to bite her. Instead, the robot responded by chirping and projecting a menu of features: spot cleaning, deep clean, emergency sanitation, guest protocol, dance mode. She poked at dance mode, and the robot whirred to life, spinning in tight circles and emitting a series of tones that, with a little imagination, sounded like the opening bars of YMCA. Petie, emboldened by the music, attempted to join in, only to be outmaneuvered at every turn. When dance mode ended, the robot retracted its brushes and gently buffed the tips of its sensor ring, as if preening. "Should we, tip it?" Sarah asked. Tom shrugged. "Leave out some dog hair. It seems to like that." She watched as the robot zipped off again, tracing a spiral pattern across the living room carpet, erasing even the most stubborn of stains. The blue splotches faded, the fibers fluffed. Every pass left the house more itself, but better, an upgraded version of domestic chaos. Mittens, perhaps out of professional courtesy, jumped onto the couch and stretched out, tail flicking with mild approval. Petey sprawled in the center of the rug, following the robot's progress with a new, awestruck respect. Tom sat on the floor and crossed his legs, still watching the robot. "Maybe we should have asked for their tech support hotline before they left." Sarah laughed. It was a real, full laugh, the kind that loosened knots behind her ribs and made her eyes water with relief. The diplomatic sanitation companion finished its routine, parked itself under the coffee table, and shut off its blue eye with a soft click. A final message floated in the air. "Thank you for hosting. Enjoy peace and order." Sarah glanced around. The house was immaculate, the scars of the visit transformed into barely visible memory. She knelt, stroked the top of the robot's shell, and whispered, "You're welcome." For the first time in a week, the Peterson house felt like home. Better even. She wondered what the Queen would say if she could see it now. Chapter 17. By lunchtime, the family's attempt at back to normal was in full effect. The living room, freshly sanitized and restored to a presentable state, already bore the marks of its true inhabitants. Petie had reclaimed the couch, Sarah's hopeful layering of lint roller strips now buried under a fresh explosion of brindle fur. The cleaning robot hovered nearby, running gentle interference, but the dog had already learned to ignore its attempts at order. Mittens took up residence on the top shelf, glaring down like a vengeful librarian. Every time the robot passed beneath, the cat's tail flicked with undisguised contempt, as if keeping a running tally of every insult to feline dignity. The kids, emboldened by the end of martial law, had staged a coup with their toys. Kyle's entire Hot Wheels fleet lay bumper to bumper on the rug, winding in and out of complex multi-story parking garages assembled from couch cushions and old shoeboxes. Kindra, never one for subtlety, deployed her collection of glitter and rainbow stickers with a zeal that defied the laws of both physics and good taste. By 2 p.m., the living room carpet glimmered with a patina of holographic sparkle that not even the robot could fully subdue. Sarah drifted through the scene with a sense of relief so profound it nearly rendered her weightless. She paused to scratch Petie behind the ears, watching as the dog groaned with satisfaction, and then, without breaking eye contact, rolled over and shed another square inch of fur onto the nearest pillow. She snorted, unable to summon any real annoyance. Tom appeared, arms full of laundry, and deposited the basket onto the floor before collapsing beside Petie. I never thought I'd be so happy to see dog hair on the furniture, he said, stretching until his joints popped. The house is a disaster. It's our disaster. He smiled, and for a moment the chaos receded. Sarah sat next to him and leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the mess, the noise, and the shimmer of half-stuck stickers fade into the background. They sat like that, quiet, until the cleaning robot interrupted by trundling over and nudging Tom's foot with a polite, insistent beep. He looked down. You want to turn on the couch? The robot spun in place, then reversed direction and parked itself under the coffee table, where it deployed a telescoping duster and commenced battle with a colony of dust bunnies. Sarah watched it for a minute. I hope it sticks around, she said. It's growing on me. Think we could train it to do bedtime? Sarah snorted again, then closed her eyes. For the first time since the Queen's arrival, she felt herself unclench. She was just drifting into a nap, lulled by the hum of the cleaning robot and the murmur of Kyle's toy car sound effects, when a sharp, crystalline chime resonated through the room. The air above the coffee table shimmered. A faint blue light coalesced, brightening and resolving into the familiar, elegant profile of Queen Xylar. Her eyes, rendered in perfect three-dimensional clarity, fixed directly on Sarah and Tom. Petie sat upright, ears flattened. Mittens hissed, then dove behind the TV. Kindra and Kyle pressed closer, eyes wide. The Queen's translucent form raised one hand in what was either a blessing or a command. "Attention, honored hosts," she intoned, her voice layered with an echo that resonated in Sarah's skull. "The following message is of the highest protocol." Sarah and Tom sat, paralyzed, as the Queen's message unfolded in the center of their reclaimed chaos, blue light painting their faces in royal relief. In that moment, the house belonged to the Queen again, or maybe, Sarah thought, it always had. She waited, breath held, for whatever came next. Chapter 18. The Queen's image flickered, resolved, and then filled the entire airspace above the coffee table, perfectly rendered in regal blue. Even as a projection, Queen Xylar managed to dominate the room, her hands folded in front of her, gaze locked on her human host with a composure that bordered on supernatural. "Esteemed Peterson family," she began, and the words hung in the air as if painted on the wall. "Our departure is complete. This transmission is to acknowledge your compliance, resourcefulness, and adaptive hospitality during our time of study." Sarah let her hands drift upward, fingers splayed in a half-hearted wave as if she might feel the Queen's presence through the light alone. Tom, slack-jawed, had gone perfectly still. It was the first time in 24 hours that the kids weren't wrestling for dominance of the TV remote. Xylar continued, "Your performance has exceeded all expectations for a first contact cohort. The Council will recommend that Earth's suburban quadrants are suitable for future diplomatic endeavors. In particular, your household demonstrates a capacity for rapid protocol assimilation, tolerance for variance, and resilience in the face of persistent adversity." The kids beamed at this, as if being called adversity by the Queen herself was the highest possible praise. "Further, it is our conclusion," the Queen intoned, "that continued integration between our species will yield mutual benefit. We will schedule a follow-up visitation at the next Terran annum pending favorable planetary alignment." Sarah's hand dropped and she blinked twice. Annual? She wants to make this a yearly thing? The Queen's projection executed a grand, sweeping gesture. "As a token of our regard, the diplomatic sanitation companion is left in your care. Treat it as you would a member of your own household or superior." The robot, sensing its cue, zipped into the center of the room and flashed its blue eye in a salute. The Queen's face softened by a fraction of a millimeter, affection, or perhaps the Xylosian equivalent of sarcasm. It is customary to close with a gesture of enduring peace. She extended her hand, palm forward, and the projection shimmered, sending a ripple of light through the room. "Farewell, hosts, until the next variance." With that, the hologram dissolved into a shower of glimmering particles that floated upward, then faded into nothing. For several heartbeats, nobody spoke. The room pulsed with the memory of Queen Xylar's presence. Then slowly Sarah turned to Tom. He met her gaze, and they both started to laugh, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and unguarded. Kyle, already halfway through his second memory cube, looked up and said, "Does this mean we're famous now?" Kindra hugged her unicorn pod to her chest and declared, "We have to clean every day forever. The Queen is watching." Tom groaned. "Maybe we should start stockpiling anti-gravity cushions now." Sarah reached over, squeezing his hand until her knuckles blanched. "Or just move," she said, but the words came out with more joy than defeat. On the couch, Petty barked at the spot where the hologram had vanished, then flopped onto his side, the couch now fully his domain. Mittens, emboldened by the sudden silence, descended from the bookshelf in a single, sinuous leap. He landed beside the cleaning robot, gave it a measured sniff, and finding it no real threat, curled up next to it in a rare act of interspecies détente. Sarah and Tom sat together, the kids racing through the living room, the cleaning robot in gentle pursuit. In the lingering blue glow of the Queen's farewell, the house felt alive with possibility, messy, unpredictable, and brimming with new rules yet to be broken. They sat there a long time, the memory of the Queen's visit weaving itself into the fabric of their ordinary, extraordinary life. And as the sun dipped below the singed circle of the backyard lawn, Sarah knew, deep in her bones, that when the Xylosians came back, they'd be ready. At least this time, she thought, we'll know to have extra glitter.